Welcome everybody to episode number 23 of reacting to every single Alex O'Connor video on the internet. How are we doing, guys? Currently, we are in the middle of a blizzard where we are at, so I think some of my stream metrics are a little not quite working as normal, but we are definitely pushing through. So it's so funny. We're in the Midwest here, and literally a couple days ago it was like 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and now it's below freezing, and we have like almost a foot of snow. So that's the that's the kind of life we have over here. But we are getting through this. Today we're discussing some pretty interesting videos. Hopefully get through at least maybe a couple today. But we're starting out with a video with Alex O'Connor and Genetically Modified Skeptic. So that's Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. You might be familiar with him, but it's this video here. Is religion all that bad? Now, this is a pretty interesting video because it gets into a lot of what I think we hear today in the kind of atheist sphere, specifically where the atheist sphere interacts with the Christian sphere online. And a lot of the talk is that, new atheism's dead. Like, new atheism's like a dead trend. No one really cares about it. Everyone, is either Christian or another religion, or if they're atheist, they just don't really care too much to, talk about how religion's like ill or poor or anything like that. So today we're reacting to a video that came out about 3 years ago. And it's really fascinating because I think this is kind of the beginnings of when Alex started to talk about the fact that he's no longer considering himself a new atheist, someone who's anti-religion, anti-Christianity specifically, but now is instead someone who's a little bit more friendly toward people of other faiths, doesn't really consider it to be a bad thing, but instead as something that is just something he just doesn't think to be true, and moving further in the direction of philosophy rather than anti-apologetics and all of that good stuff. But welcome to the stream. He's so cool. Yeah, no, Alex is quite the debonair person. I think both of these guys are pretty fascinating. So far, though, through this series, we have reacted to 197 videos, and out of that, together through these live streams, we have done 47 videos. So we're almost at 50, almost at half a century, baby. That's fucking wild. And we're just moving. We're getting through this. By the end of I think August, we'll have gotten through every single episode. So stay tuned. But as I mentioned before, we are discussing a video between Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic and Alex O'Connor himself, discussing whether new atheism is dead or whether it is still a topic of interest. Let me know in the comments below. Do you guys think that new atheism is dead? Do you think that do you think that there's still a group of people who are espousing this and very anti-religion? I think that's how I would define new atheism. They were anti-religion, specifically Christianity. And as always, if you go to the description, I got a bingo card. So as we continue through this series, Alex O'Connor brings up a lot of very similar things. So go to the description. It says, let's play bingo. And you can get your very own unique bingo card and follow that along as we have this discussion and see if you get a bingo. So, and you get a free space for free. For mine, I got Islam, Bart Ehrman, triangle in the brain. He hasn't really developed that analogy yet at this point, but we'll see when that starts to be introduced more regularly. Sam Harris, I Was an Altar Boy, where he talks about his past in that, psychedelics, animal liberation, reductivism, And you can kind of see the rest of the list there. So if you want to play along, click that, and I will be shouting them out as we go. And if you're watching this later on, you can definitely just comment below, and I'll shout you out in the next live stream. So, all right. Well, I say without further ado, let's get into this thing. We are having a conversation. Is religion all that bad? With Genetically Modified Skeptic. Here we go.
I'm trying to speak to the people.
Oh, let me pull it all the way back. Oh, my, hold on. Give me a second. I had to alter a couple things before starting the stream. So that's why my monitor's a little off. All right, there we go. That looks better. Here we go.
I don't know that I would consider myself an atheist activist anymore.
Or would you say that you think there is no God?
Yeah, that's actually really difficult. Calling them irrational and just flatly delusional in a very the God delusion kind of way is not me anymore.
Do you wish that Christianity were true? This episode of the Cosmic Skeptic podcast is brought to you by you. To support the
I gotta say, because I think that's a pretty interesting question. I think it's a very loaded question. Do you think Christianity is true? And or do you think do you wish Christianity were true? I think it's an interesting question for sure. But the thing that always stumps me is what type of expression of Christianity are we talking about, right? Is it a more fundamentalist, like creationist view, or is it like one where it's a little bit more loose, open to like evolution, open to other expressions? Another thing, is it kind of more conservative or liberal? Is it more traditional? Like there's a lot of avenues to Christianity. It's very diverse. There's thousands of denominations. And so that would be my main thing. But I personally would say I don't know if I'd like Christianity to be true as it is represented in modern day. But I do think it would be very interesting to see what Jesus' teachings were, and to be a little bit more open-minded to other interpretations of Jesus's teachings, especially more kind of Gnostic interpretations. I find those to be very fascinating. So, but yeah, let me know. What would you answer that question? Do you hope that Christianity were true? Would you wish that to be the case?
podcast, please visit patreon.com/Cosmic Skeptic. So welcome back, everybody, to the Cosmic Skeptic podcast. Today, I am joined by the one and only Genetically Modified Skeptic, real name, of course, Drew McCoy.
Yep.
Now, arguably, the biggest channel in YouTube, Atheism, unless we count people like TJ Kirk, but I think I don't think he's as watchable as maybe he used to be.
Current channel.
Yeah. I just wanted to start by saying I'm not bitter about it at all. I don't care that you overtook me in subscribers.
We can still be friends.
I would have talked to you not just for the clout, but just for the
conversation.
Exactly. But congratulations on surpassing 500,000 subscribers. The first of our niche to do it. I wonder.
It's fascinating hearing this in retrospect, because Alex is now the most subscribed to atheist YouTuber by quite a long shot. I don't think anyone else has reached 1 million. I don't know. I have to check if Drew's reached 1 million yet, but I think he's like just shy of 1 million. So that's pretty interesting. Hey, Marin, welcome to the stream. Welcome. But yeah, I think it's so fascinating to see those numbers, give and take. Honestly, Alex has really shot up in subscribers in the last like year and a half. It's pretty insane.
What you attribute that success to? I mean, you've done pretty well recently. You've had a lot of videos that are doing very well, and I wonder if there's a kind of formula that you're following that's been working recently, or what you think it's down to?
Oh, I would say the number one thing is that I purposely attempt to do quite the opposite of what I think the majority of atheist YouTubers did before about 2017 or so. There are tons of other atheist YouTubers who have done what you and I have done, which is try to stick to the issues, try to stick to a kind and compassionate way of speaking, but not necessarily pulling punches in our arguments. I think,
you know, it's really interesting. I've noticed the rise of a lot of kind of atheist YouTubers who, I mean, they don't even say that they're atheists. They kind of recognize themselves as more agnostic. That seems to be a more friendly term these days. But my mind goes to, what's that guy's name? He does the church audit thing. But he like constantly talks about how Christianity's like, he almost wishes that it was true. He goes back and forth on that a little bit. And so I feel like I've seen a lot more people who are agnostic and almost wishing that it was true, that they could come to the point of seeing that it were true. So it's an interesting like cultural shift. Not to mention like Gen Z is shifting in the direction of religion, at least currently post COVID. Yes, heliocentric. Yeah, thank you. I was blanking on it. But yeah, so it's kind of an interesting like cultural shift going on. I don't know if it's going to last or not. It's hard to predict those kind of things, but it's funny that they say like back then it wasn't even like normal to be just cordial and to give people the benefit of the doubt, but instead it was like just about dogging on, you know, religion and things like that. And so just being cordial was considered, you know, out there like wild. Whereas today, it's kind of gone beyond that, in my opinion.
I think before there was a lot of outrage baiting, and there still is, but I think that outrage baiting and demeaning people that atheists have been hurt by in the US primarily was the primary goal with atheist content for so long. The fact that I try to do the exact opposite of that really means that I'm reaching a market that has been underserved.
And what is the goal of the channel? A lot of people compare us. We're in a very similar niche. Some people even confuse us for each other. Yeah. This is probably the first time that they've seen real hard evidence that we are not in fact the same person. Although the camera angles, you know, we're only seeing one at a time. It's very easy to edit this kind of thing, but hopefully we can quell those rumors. But although we're in the same niche and we talk about the same kind of stuff and we're both adjective skeptic, I feel as though we're kind of doing different things, and I think you'd agree. My goal with the channel has always been something like philosophy communication. I was really interested in philosophical argument, and I think that if I have a talent for anything, it might be explaining things. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to take these wonderful arguments that people might have considered but not have understood or maybe haven't come across, and just get them into the conversation on the YouTube space. But you strike me as someone who that's not your goal. We were talking about this earlier, and you said that this isn't really the kind of thing that you're going for with your channel.
Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of what I've noticed. I think Drew is very much so focused on the side of things where he wants to help people a lot. He's more kind of that activist side. There was a live stream I did earlier where Alex was kind of getting a lot of critique because he was not really focused on being an activist and kind of pushing people that he was a part of on these different, you know, podcasts that he was going on. He wasn't like pushing people like the Flagrant podcast. People were saying his showing on there, it was just kind of discussing fun topics of philosophy rather than actually like pushing them on some of the things that they've been espousing and even coming back on, and just like not really covering. Back then it was more with like Epstein, like they were really like, you know, wanting to talk about the Epstein files, but then they just stopped talking about it as soon as Trump became elected. So that was an interesting kind of topic there. And everyone was like, why aren't you talking about this with them? And I just don't think that's what Alex is for. If they wanted someone to do that, I think Drew would probably be a better candidate for that. So honestly, it's really just about just because someone is a part of a group does not mean they will, I guess, act in the same way as you would expect them to. So.
And I touch on things like that. Obviously, I give arguments and I delve into philosophy and science and psychology, but I think I'm dealing with the aftermath of people having these conversations with those with whom they disagree strongly. You may deal with the philosophical, I deal with the relational. And so while we're still talking about similar topics, our titles and our thumbnails may be very similar, I'm trying to speak to the people and the emotions they may have surrounding this topic and deal with that maybe primarily.
Are you trying to, if somebody lands on your channel, are you envisioning them watching your content and through it maybe becoming an atheist? Is it the kind of content that's supposed to do that for people, or is it content that's made for people who are already atheists?
I think that it has to do with, I don't really want to make atheist converts. I want to provide a space where people can think complexly without feeling like if they come to a conclusion on whatever side, that they will be socially punished for doing that.
You once described yourself in your Twitter bio, I'm not sure if you still do, I haven't checked, as an atheist activist. Is that still in there?
It's not in there anymore.
It was before.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what is an atheist activist, and how are you defining atheism here?
Oh, yeah, that's a really hard one, actually. I don't know that I would consider myself an atheist activist anymore. The reason that is I used to think that creating a community surrounding the term atheism, however you define it, was a place where when people come out of religion, they can land there. This community surrounding the atheist label can help you rebuild your life, escape those social consequences that you may have incurred from leaving religion.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely hear that a lot. And, as someone who's done that, I feel that, difficulty. But I think the thing that New Atheism ran into is basically you're being against something without being for something, right? So if your focus is entirely like anti this thing, well, then there's no like identity to that. There's nothing to be positive toward, and that can be very denigrating over an extended period of time. And so I think that's probably why New Atheism is not really seen as like a positive thing. I do think it was positive in a lot of aspects because it opened the door to a lot of skepticism for people who in the Western world maybe were scared to do that. It became a lot more normalized. And some, religious traditions that are dangerous were pushed back against. But at the same time, if you're going to leave a tradition, right? If you're going to leave like what your grounding is, you then have to find another sort of grounding beyond that. And if you don't do that, then it's going to cause a lot of, I think, damage down the road. So it's good to be in those circles too. But if the circle is just about like being against something rather than for something, I think that can be problematic.
The atheist community was supposed to be something that helps people turn over a new leaf and do better. I'm not so sure if organizing around the label atheism or atheist is really the most effective way of doing that. I'm not involved in any kind of nonprofits or organizations anymore. I think very highly of the Recovering from Religion Foundation and Freedom from Religion Foundation, but I'm not actually involved in promoting those necessarily. I'll send people there if they need those resources, but I'm not on the board of any nonprofits anymore. I'm just flying solo, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, but a big part of it is I'm not trying to build a community surrounding the label atheist as if atheist is some moral good. I think it's completely neutral.
But I would imagine you would still call yourself an atheist.
Yeah.
What do you mean by atheist there? Are you taking the kind of lack of belief view here? Or would you say that you think there is no God?
Yeah, that's actually really difficult. If I was going to define myself in philosophical terms, I think to be the most cautious, I would say that I'm agnostic. I'm a temporal agnostic. I don't know that we can determine whether there are gods at this time.
Yeah, there are two different forms of agnosticism that are often put forward. One is that, well, the question can be known. You can form a reasonable belief either way. It's just that I haven't done so, so I'm an agnostic. There's another kind of agnostic who says that, well, we just can't know. It's not just that I don't know, but that we can't know, that we can't even really come to meaningfully believe strongly either way, reasonably. Are you making that kind of second claim, that you think it's something that really is sort of unknowable in principle?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's not knowable in principle. I'm open to having that idea overturned, but that's where I would fall. As far as calling myself an actual atheist, though, it's really just practical. It's not that I am trying to claim that I believe or know that there are no gods. It's just that if you call yourself an agnostic in Texas, people will be like, okay, so you're on the fence about whether or not Christianity is real. Like, no,
right.
with specific, well-defined gods, no, I'm not on the fence.
I've also noticed that whenever I use the term agnostic, it's become more well-known, but there's a lot of people that just don't know what that means. So if you're talking to like the general public, I feel like it's become more well-known, but you'll have conversations every once in a while and you'll say, oh yeah, I'm agnostic. And they'll be like, what does that mean? I don't understand. And then you explain and they're like, oh, okay. And but it's like one of those things that's not, I think, as well known as the word atheist. So it's kind of interesting. If you guys have agnostic, I don't have it on my bingo card. They did kind of mention atheists don't have the burden of proof. So if you have that on yours as well, go ahead and mark that one out. Let's try to get a bingo today. Hasn't been a bingo in quite some time. So that'd be wonderful. Let's keep going.
I see. I guess I'm interested in kind of the sustaining cause of your position, because you can talk about, and you've made videos before talking about why you became an atheist, why you are an atheist at this particular time in your life. But of course, you also stay this way. And for myself, I've always been an agnostic, probably an agnostic leaning towards strong atheism. I've said that before. This was because I thought there were no real good arguments either way. Now I feel like there are good arguments going both ways, but they kind of have equal force. And I wonder which of those positions you take. Do you think that there are good reasons to think that there might be no God, but there are also other reasons and it's all just a bit too complicated? Or do you just think that none of the arguments really do it for you? Is there anything that you would put forward if you were to defend a sort of atheism? Is there something that does speak to you that you could put forward and say, this is something that kind of pushes me in that direction?
So something they didn't mention though, and Alex really focuses on this a lot in his like early videos, but there's like a diagram where you can on one end, the like vertical end, there's the gnosis and agnosticism. So like gnosis meaning I have knowledge of the fact that this is true, and agnostic being I lack knowledge whether that is true or not. So that would be kind of the one side, whereas theism versus atheism is a active belief. So whether or not you have enough knowledge to believe in God, to have that direct kind of gnosis, or agnosticism, you don't have that, you lack that knowledge. It's not a claim to knowledge, but it's a claim to what you actively believe, what you attain to in your daily life and practice. Do you believe that there's a God in your practice, or do you not? And so, I mean, this is the kind of argument he makes a lot, is that everyone in a sense is agnostic, unless you feel like 100% sure that there is a God. And so it's an interesting kind of spectrum, the vertical side, gnosis versus agnosticism, and then theism and atheism. So the belief side of things.
If I was going to try to make a positive case, I would not be doing so by making philosophical arguments necessarily. I think I'd point to psychology and sociology, the creation of gods, that gods are something that began. Yahweh had a beginning, therefore. Gods were not something that necessarily always existed. We can track the evolution of specific gods at least throughout time, see how cultural influences, governmental influences change the conceptions of gods. If I was going to make a positive argument, to say that gods do not exist, or that gods more accurately are an invention of man, that's the angle I would come at. As far as philosophy, that's not something that I regularly study in particular depth, and maybe I know more about philosophy than average, but I'm much more interested in psychology, sociology, anthropology.
So it's kind of looking at the nature of religious belief as a sociological, psychological construct that makes you think this seems unreal. And you say it's maybe something to do with the fact that gods seem to have been invented throughout history, that you have this idea of particular gods not existing in the minds of very early human beings. Certainly before human beings existed, there was no such conception, and that these kind of came about as a result of the human mind. I think some people would want to ask if we kind of like assume the religious hypothesis that there is this God who's always existed, and sure, he hasn't always been present in the minds of human beings, but the fact that the human mind has this seeming predisposition to, as you would say, create gods, but there seems to be something about the numinous that attracts humans across cultures. Basically, any culture we discover seems to have had some conception of the divine. Now, of course, it's easy enough to imagine that these have just been invented by their minds. There might be something about human nature that makes it such that they need to have some spiritual guidance or something. But there could at least be an argument that says that, sure, the human mind seems to only latch on to this idea of God at a particular point, but maybe that's just because there is this God who was slowly designing the psychological structure that would come to be able to understand him. And I wonder what you would think to that kind of approach of explaining away this sustaining cause of atheism.
If there was data or some kind of archaeological record that reflected that, then I would be happy to say that I think that that's more likely. Sure, that's a hypothesis. I would love to be able to see if we can test that somehow, see if we can back up that hypothesis somehow. But until we can get to that point, I'm not completely sure if that's as tenable as the idea that gods do actually evolve.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have two competing hypotheses here, and as long as we don't have particularly good reason to accept either, we should remain in a position of agnosticism.
Yeah, and it's not...
Well, it's interesting that he brings up he would need data to back up that claim, because to me it just seems like a different interpretation of the data rather than data and or lack of data in and of itself. Like, from what I understood from Alex's argument there, it was that, yeah, we see gods kind of evolve over time, but might that just be a representation of our coming to a understanding of God better and better over time, and in a sense being sanctified in our understanding of God throughout the ages, which is something I actually believed in for a while. So I think it's less to do with the data itself and more to do with the which is the more likely interpretation of the data. And I would agree with Drew that I think the more likely interpretation is the kind of evolutionary one there. So, and if you got evolution, go ahead and mark that one off on the bingo sheet. But yeah, it's so fascinating. I was when I've been reading the God's Propaganda by Kip Davis, it kind of opened my mind to a lot of the different Canaanite gods and how those influenced the understanding of Yahweh. Yahweh was initially like a storm god, and very similar to Baal as a storm god. In fact, like a rival god to the storm god Baal. And so it's kind of fascinating to see how even Yahweh kind of evolved as a god. Initially he was the god to these, small town, just small town folk in the mountainsides, the initial Israelites, as we think they were, who hated the city, and to then becoming the God who established a king, a monarchy despite the fact that he didn't really want that. And it's really fascinating kind of seeing the cultural, I want to say like cultural controversies between the different perspectives. So welcome, Riley. I love Kip Davis's work. I took his, you took his Hebrew class. Nice. That's super cool. Yeah, he just started a new one. Are you in the one that he's currently doing right now, or are you in did you already finish it already? You can let me know about that. But yeah, no, he's a great guy. Love him. Super cool. But yeah, we can continue.
It's not a sure thing that gods are entirely invented by the mind. I mean, historical and archaeological records only go back so far, and certainly we had the capacity to imagine or worship or commune with gods or have some kind of spiritual experience far before any of that material evidence materialized.
Now, a lot of people have made a great deal throughout history of saying that, yes, gods are invented by human beings, and they're invented in order to control and to oppress and to cause wars and to cause tragedy and to hold people in bondage, and unquestionably so. I find that a lot of the time when someone jumps on the I'm not convinced of God's existence line of thinking, there's this tendency or a temptation to join a team of you find like a community online, and a great deal of that community says that not only is religion untrue, but it's also harmful.
Right.
But of course these can be pulled apart. That you can be a reluctant atheist, a non-resistant non-believer, as I describe myself.
Yeah.
I wonder about your views on this, whether you think that religion, true or not, is something worth having, at least in some form, or if you would describe yourself as something of an anti-theist.
That's what that was the topic of our first collaboration, actually. Even if religion isn't necessarily true, is it useful?
Yeah.
I had a different opinion of it then. I don't know if I'd say strongly, but I was happy to call myself an anti-theist then when I had first started. And a big part of it was leaving a religious team, and joining a new team, which was the atheist movement, new atheism, whatever you want to call it. And especially since I've fallen away from being involved with organizations like that, I have not found myself tempted to call myself an anti-theist. And frankly, I just don't think that it can be demonstrated that in all cases believing in a theistic God or supernatural conception of any kind is inherently harmful. And that seemed to be the central claim of those who call themselves anti-theists. I don't align with that now.
Do you think that historically religion has done more harm than good?
I'm not sure that it can be quantified well enough to say either way.
I think the main problem with that question is, what is religion? Like, religion's such a hard thing to define. We have, these religious institutions, but religion's much more than that. You could even consider people going to a concert and the ways that they have, rituals at like a Taylor Swift concert, or they, shout the same kind of cheers at like a sports game. A lot of that stuff is very similar to the things that we see in religion, and it hits the same kind of psychological aspects and psychological needs that humans have. And so you can argue that is religion, like people, like I say people, this is me, bro. I get super into like fantasy and like digging into like the world building of different things. I'm very interested in like storytelling. And in that process, I find it very similar to mythology and the exploration of what came before, and understanding ourselves through ancient kind of storytelling and world building in that way, and constructing understanding of our world through stories. All of that, I think, is expressions of what we mean by religion, both historically and today. And so to say that, like, has religion been mostly, positive or negative, I think that assumes that we have an understanding of what we mean by the word religion. And I think it's just such a broad term I really don't think anyone is technically non-religious. I think people are non-religious institutions, right? They're not involved in those. But to say that you're not involved in any sort of religious practice at all, I think is not true. I think pretty much everyone has that kind of psychological desire and psychological need.
It's kind of like, has agriculture done more harm than good? It's like, well, if it weren't for agriculture, we probably wouldn't have climate change.
I see what you mean. Well, it's an impossible question to answer in my view, and I'm glad to hear you say that, actually, because I guess we both probably would used to have been of a disposition to say that it has done more harm than good.
Yeah.
I probably would have said so quite confidently, and now I don't know if it's done more good than harm, but at the very least I think I must remain agnostic on the question.
Yeah.
To me,
I think that word's going to come up a lot, agnostic. It's interesting.
Saying religion is bad is like saying politics is bad. Politics has caused so many wars, and it drives families apart, and it makes friends fall out, and it makes people excommunicate each other. It's all terrible, and it's just this construct of the human mind that's used to control and oppress. Yes, politics does that, but it doesn't kind of follow from this strangely vague notion, politics is bad, that there isn't at least one legitimate political view. Most people are not apolitical.
I think this is similar to when people say like social media is bad. In today's age, it's so like just big to dog on like social media and say like, oh, it's a bad thing. We never should have invented it. Those are kind of extreme positions, but in my opinion, social media is a tool. It's a tool to an end. And if you are using that toward good ends, then it's not bad. It's a good thing. But if you're using that toward negative ends that are, damaging to yourself, damaging to relationships in your life, damaging to your mental health, which is, it's easy for that to happen. Or even just damaging to other people, right? If we're exposing people and, harming, just like private information and things of that sort on the internet, like that can all be really bad. So it's a tool that can be used for either good or bad. And so I kind of see religion the same way. It's a tool that is either going to be used for the benefit of Homo sapiens, or it's going to be used for the detriment of Homo sapiens. So it's kind of yin and yang depending on how it's used.
And even those who are very strongly politically engaged, if you ask them, is politics a good thing, they'd say no. And so I think that if we look at religious history, if you're a Christian, for example, the majority of people on planet Earth are not Christian. But the majority of people on planet Earth are religious to some degree. And so even a Christian could say, yeah, religion is bad, if by religion we encompass anybody who is nominally religious. But that doesn't exclude the idea of certain religious ideas being actually beneficial, even necessary to human spiritual growth or something like this. I want to take something specific. Christianity is the religion that you and I have a history with. Do you wish that Christianity were true? Is it something that you would be glad to be proved?
Oh boy, I'm so excited to hear what he has to say to this. This is a fascinating question to me.
To you? Would you be glad to have it proved to you?
I think it would be really exciting if it was proved, just to have the massive metaphysical baggage that Christianity has to be proved true would be extremely exciting. I mean, the revelation of a lifetime for me. Absolutely. It depends on how you define Christianity.
So let's take a kind of minimal approach to this. Let's say that I could prove to you that there was a man called Jesus who died on a cross, rose from the dead, and that in some way by doing so, as long as you kind of are confident that this happened and are willing to accept it, you are able to inherit eternal life, kind of happy non-physical existence, or like newly physical existence after you die, and in accordance with the will of the Father of Christianity. Would you like this?
Is hell involved? Are there eternal punishments?
Let's say yes. Let's try out a few different ideas. I imagine the reason you ask that is because something about there being a hell would put you off wanting it to be true. Is that because you're worried about going there yourself, or because you're worried about people that you love and care about going there?
It has more to do with, at least the Christianity that I came from said that the vast majority of people who had ever existed and will exist in the future will end up there. So as far as I understand suffering, as far as how I think of morality, grounding it in conscious suffering, I would say, no, I wouldn't want that to be true, because I wouldn't want the vast majority of people to suffer. If we're talking about a version of Christianity where there is no hell, which there are plenty of permutations of Christianity where that is the case, then sure, yeah, if it would result in more pleasure.
Peter, I believe, let me know if that's correct, but you said that's a problem. Sorry, that's a Protestant way of looking at things, which is not evidenced by history. So are you referring to his perspective on hell, or are you looking at something else that was said? Because I would agree with the fact that, yeah, that is a Protestant perspective. There's eternal conscious torment, which is seemingly what Drew's alluding to here. The idea that hell is this eternal place that lasts forever, and it's just constantly a place where you are conscious and being tormented, right? Whether it be fire or some other aspect, maybe it's separation from God. That's another one. Is it like active, like punishment, or is it just mere separation from God? Those are a lot of interesting topics. Then there's annihilationism, which is the idea that it only lasts for a certain degree, and then there's the second death, in which you enter the lake of fire, as in Revelation 21, and you can interpret that as evidence of annihilationism, that those who go to hell do not last in the fires eternally, but eventually are annihilated and no longer are conscious beings alive in any sense of the word. And then there's universalism, which is the idea that everyone eventually does get saved, but that hell is sort of this refining fire, and that after the refining fire process, you then are entirely refined by the punishment of hell, and are then able to enter into paradise with the Father. So I would agree. There are a lot of topics here, and it seems like he's working from a eternal conscious torment perspective, which I think is the main kind of perspective of hell for a lot of Protestants, and that's his background. So I'm assuming that's probably why he's bringing that up. But yeah, let me know if that's what you were referring to, though. If you were referring to something else, we can discuss that. But yeah,
more happiness, more euphoria, then sure. At the same time, though, I think a lot of Christians don't necessarily think of Christianity as.
Riley says the concept of hell came from a pre-Christian underworld tradition, specifically the Hebrew Sheol, a shadowy, neutral abode of the dead. The Greek notions of Hades, it's not biblical. Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's not true to the original Hebrew Bible. It is biblical in the New Testament sense, with a lot of that kind of Greek influence. There's also a lot of influence, from my understanding, from like Zoroastrianism. And so when the later books in the Old Testament were written, they had a lot of influence from apocalyptic literature, right? So literature discussing like the end times and the end of everything, right? And a lot of that is influenced by Zoroastrianism, as well as the idea of there being like a heaven or hell. But you're right, Sheol was not hell, but that's the way that they interpret it. I was raised Roman Catholic, and they talk about hell a lot. Yeah, they do. It's interesting. I think, let me know if you felt this way, Riley, but I didn't ever feel scared of hell after leaving my faith. But I know that a lot of people do. A lot of people like just felt this like fear of hell. And I've noticed that a lot of it is people who are Catholic rather than Protestant. It's not perfect, 1-to-1, but I feel like from what I've understood, generally the people who, deconstruct from their faith and then are afraid of hell, generally they come from a Roman Catholic background. So I wonder if it's because it's emphasized more. There's a lot more maybe guilt about, going to hell. I don't know, because that was never really a big emphasis, at least in the churches that I was a part of. I grew up evangelical Protestant. So, but yeah, I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that. I think it's kind of fascinating. Something I've kind of noticed.
As just, it's good to experience pleasure and it's bad to experience pain and hell. Ultimately, no matter what happens, it is justified because God justifies it. Doesn't matter if you can make a logical case for that. Doesn't matter if it makes any sense to you at all. It matters whether or not God is as we conceive him to be, as being completely and perfectly morally just at all times, regardless of what happens. So if I'm granting that Christianity is true, am I granting that no matter what the spread is for how people are suffering, that's good?
I think you would have to grant.
It's pretty interesting suggestion there, because what he's saying is basically, despite human intuition of morality, does God's word always go, right? Kind of like a divine decree type of morality, which is something that William Lane Craig is a proponent for, and has gotten him into claiming some pretty wild stuff, like the fact that the Midianite children who were slaughtered by the Israelites, that was actually better for them than to have lived a full life, because they would not be going to hell because of the age of, because of just not being old enough to be accountable for their sin. And then he goes on to say that the tragedy in that situation is actually the Israelites who are forced to kill these infants, and forced by God to have to carry out his will. That's the real tragedy going on. I just I think divine command theory is going to lead people to a lot of crazy conclusions. But yeah, I'm sure that's kind of what Alex is going to talk about here. But it really is, does God's commands supersede the intuition of humans?
That if there is a hell and there are people in it, they deserve to be there in some very real sense. Of course, it's troubling to imagine people that we love and care about being in this place of torment.
Yeah.
But if Christianity were true, and it was somehow just true that the people in hell deserve to be there, I guess it kind of complicates the question. It's difficult to know what it is to wish that were true. Well, I certainly wish that people get what they deserve, right? And so I guess trivially, if somebody genuinely deserves anything, then I wish that they get it in that respect. I guess the problem...
So I just saw the comments. That's a belief so brutal. Yeah. If you look up William Lane Craig on his response to the slaughter of the Midianites, there's also a topic, genocide in the Bible, between Alex and William Lane Craig, and Alex gets him to basically say that. So Richard Dawkins has also responded to that. That's one of the reasons Richard Dawkins said that he'd never have a conversation with William Lane Craig, because of that belief. So it's interesting. The funniest thing to me about objective morality stemming from a God is that it doesn't matter if God exists or not. Either way, objective morality is an impossible question. Yes. I mean, to me, it depends on how you define objective morality. Because I think a lot of people who understand and define objective morality, they'll sort of bring it to the point of, well, it's God's character. And so morality isn't like a creation of God as a subject, nor is it a thing that supersedes God, and so God has to like follow the rules of morality and is subject to morality, but instead it's defining God as the foundation of reality, with that being the case for his definition, if it's part of his character, then it would also be objective in the sense of it's built into the foundation of reality. So I think that's probably the strongest argument, but I would still say, I would agree with you. I would still say that that's subjective because it's coming from a subject, which is God himself. But that's another interesting discussion there.
Problem would be trying to defend a view where people do deserve that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sinning against an infinite creator, bringing upon yourself an infinite punishment. I tend to think that if I were a Christian, I'd be an annihilationist. I would think that hell is basically separation from God. The wages of sin is death. And so, if you don't have your sin washed from you, you die. I think there's an interesting philosophical approach as well to that, which is that if you take like a contingency argument that God is the ground of being itself, nothing can exist without God sustaining it in existence, then if you choose to kind of separate yourself from God or not accept a life with God, you separate yourself from being, you separate yourself from existence, because God is the sustainer of all being. Yeah. And so this idea of hell as separation from God, I think thought about in those terms makes me more inclined to an annihilationist position. If that were what was going on, if it were everybody who doesn't meaningfully follow the will of the Father dies and is annihilated from existence, but if you want it, there's this offer to you, Drew, to throw yourself upon another human being's sacrifice on your behalf, and you get to inherit eternal glory. Is this something that you want to be true?
That's quite enticing. It seems like I already think right now that everyone will be annihilated regardless of their deeds. And if some people are not and receive something that they would be quite happy to experience for all eternity, then sure.
So do you see much?
But the thing about annihilationist views, most of the time, they do think there is still this judgment, this like punishment that occurs post-mortem. So I don't know if Drew would maybe agree with that or not. But that is something that is important about annihilationism. I was raised in a very conservative church. If you didn't pray your rosaries, you were going to hell. If you were a woman who went to college as opposed to getting married and starting a family, you were going to hell. Wow, that's so crazy, man. I'm sorry, Riley. That's rough. I'm glad that you found a place after that and were able to get out of that. But yeah. I mean, it's sad, but that's the reality for a lot of people, and it's the reality for, people still today. It's like conservative, Catholic, conservative Protestant is definitely an aspect of Christianity that I think can be very detrimental for minorities specifically. So if you go to confession, you are forgiven and have clean slate. Any sin that you didn't go to confession for, you'd get judged for. That's why Catholics are big on last rites. I see. Yeah. Sorry, what are last rites? I was never Catholic, so I'm not familiar with what exactly last rites are. So if you could inform me on that, I'd appreciate that. We can continue.
Much of your work as being engaged in sort of taking an approach to the dialectic in the back of your mind, thinking that this might actually talk me into being religious again? Or are you making sort of more like social commentaries, trying to create a space for atheists? Is it because that kind of stuff, it doesn't seem to be engaged in the question of the truth of religion as much, but do you have that kind of driving you, this kind of sense of like, I'd like to do things that if I'm wrong, I want to find out about it?
Yeah, I it's actually something I'm conflicted about. I don't want my channel to just be polemics against Christianity or just necessarily an investigation of whether or not that is true. I think there are people on both sides that do that well and better than I ever could. You being one of them. So,
you're making me blush now, Drew. You're too kind.
If I'm engaging,
I gotta put that one on the bingo card. Alex blushing
in trying to debunk Christianity or just tear Christianity apart. I'm not sure if that fits particularly well with me saying that it's not inherently.
So you responded last rites. Basically, it's for people who cannot confess their sins because they're close to death. I see. So is it like a post-mortem like confession? And is that part of like perjury or perjury, purgatory, I meant to say. Is that part of purgatory? So I need to brush up on Catholicism, but that's pretty interesting. Is like that part of purgatory, post-mortem? The priest comes to pray and ask God on your behalf to forgive your sins. Oh, okay. So it's like while you're alive, but maybe you're unconscious or you're about to die kind of thing then? I see. Okay. Interesting.
A problem to believe in the supernatural or to be a Christian. I think it depends entirely how you define it, how that affects your practice. It potentially could be very harmful to be Christian, and I think that I can point to cases where it is harmful for other people, or sometimes for the individual practicing. But yeah, I'm conflicted of whether or not I want to convince people, oh, Christianity is not true, more than just provide that space.
There's an interesting question here that I want to ask as a follow-up there, about sort of whether we want to be telling people that Christianity is false, or at least that we think it's false. Because, of course, this is famously quite meaningful to a lot of people, their Christian faith. And there's a strong culture in some Christian circles that atheism is incredibly dangerous. It's spiritually dangerous, it's socially dangerous, it's morally dangerous. Of course, we think that they exaggerate, but what are the dangers involved on all of those kind of three dimensions of thought with becoming an atheist? What is it that, are there things about becoming an atheist that you wouldn't kind of parade, you wouldn't put at the forefront and say it's something that's kind of like a negative effect of being an atheist?
To me, this question gets into the cultural aspect and not necessarily like the objective state of becoming an atheist or becoming Christian or what have you. I think it's all about the culture that you're in, right? So if you become an atheist in a culture that's very like fundamental Christian, then I think it's going to be very hard for you. It's going to be very socially isolating. You might be losing a lot of friends. It's going to be something that maybe is hard on your mental health because you're constantly having to almost act on the defense all the time. And so I think that can be an aspect of becoming an atheist that's negative. But let's say you become an atheist in a kind of more Scandinavian culture where it's a lot more accepted. There's social programs that are for people who are nuns or non-religious. That's what they call it in sociology. That is an environment that I think would actually be probably more positive. And so to me, it's really about the cultural context that you are participating in. Exactly, because you don't have the ability to confess your sins, and any sin you committed since your last confession will be judged by God. Yep, so that's your last rite. So it's pre-mortal, pre-death.
Atheist that comes along with it.
No, I'm glad that you asked the question because it's something that I have to contemplate every time I make content that is propping up atheism as something that's valid. And that is, I don't think that we, at least in the US, in the context that I'm experienced in, have very good communities to replace, not to say that religion in every aspect of someone's life has to be replaced, but say that someone comes out of evangelical Christianity like I did, and they're looking for a place to land. I'm not sure that the atheist community has historically been the greatest place for those people to land. Sometimes it works out great.
Have you guys ever been to a atheist church? You guys know what I'm talking about? There's like atheist churches out there that they congregate and they kind of have a Protestant-esque church service with like songs, and then they'll have like a sermon, but the sermon is kind of celebrating the world and community. Maybe they'll have like coffee and like cookies and stuff like that. You know, like kind of a your average like Protestant church experience, but not worshiping God, instead worshiping kind of the world and science and skepticism. Have you guys ever heard of those? I've never been to one personally, but I find them kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you guys have ever been to one of those. They seem fascinating to me.
Seen people really thrive because of the resources they've received within the atheist community, and some people have experienced pretty extreme bigotry. And having a place to land for people, whether or not we have spaces for people to land, for people to pick their lives back up, really determines my answer on whether or not I think that atheism is something that I would encourage someone to pursue in spite of their previous religious leanings. I don't think that being an atheist is inherently any way morally or as far as mental health goes. It doesn't have any innate effects, inherent effects on mental health or whatever. But the social context is pretty heavy, at least in the U.S. You don't have places to pick your life back up. And it's something that seriously troubles me. I'd like to create that, but I don't really know how to do it either.
What about what might be called something like spiritual health, which I guess is not quite synonymous with mental health? Something about the idea of atheism rationally entailing nihilism. The idea that if you don't have some kind of objective grounding of being, that if everything's just kind of an accident, you get a lot of people want to say you get a kind of moral nihilism. There's nothing to ground ethics, but also the idea of purpose, that there's nothing for which you exist ultimately, except as an accident. It seems to me that there's a strong case that can be made that if you throw off this objectivity, this necessity, this creative power, you end up void of these kinds of things. I wonder what you think about that. Does atheism, to you, entail nihilism?
I don't think so. And I think the reason why is that I would say that spiritual health that you're talking about has to do with your relation to a moral community more than it has to do with your specific position. I mean, there are Buddhists that are in strong, very enmeshed and supportive religious communities or moral communities, but they are atheists. They may not necessarily think there is some inherent meaning to being, and they may even want to escape being altogether. But because they have that enmeshed moral community, they feel the kind of meaning they need in order to feel that spiritual health.
As somebody who's trying to create a space for people who become convinced that there is no God, or become unconvinced that there is one, let's say, creating a space for such people to feel happiness and safety and meaning, would you have any advice to somebody who says to you, I've become convinced, maybe through philosophical argument, maybe they've been watching that Cosmic Skeptic, they think maybe actually I'm not sure about this whole religion thing, I'm not even sure about the whole God thing, and I'm in a moral community of people who get by, they seem to have moral intuitions that they follow. Maybe it's just a secular culture in which people just have a sense of ethics, but they kind of see through it. They think, all I'm seeing around me are highly evolved apes who are mimetically evolved to take pleasure in altruism, even if they don't recognize it as such. And they just see through it all and say, without some kind of guiding principle that exists outside of myself, without a mind that exists outside of the human mind, I just cannot see any reason to be getting out of bed in the morning. I can't see any reason to be trying to act morally where the morals don't align with what I just happen to want to do.
See, I think the thing about that is you can have that in Christianity, because purpose it's not just about like ultimate purpose, but purpose has layers to it, right? So there is purpose in the sense of like an ultimate purpose to reality, right? But if there's an ultimate purpose to reality, but you play no part in that, then that brings no purpose to your life. So in addition to an ultimate purpose, there also needs to be a role that you play in that ultimate purpose, right? So that's the second part. And then in that role, there needs to be a sense of my personality and my like way of being connects to the role that I play to ultimate purpose. So all three of those need to be in sync in order for this to work. So if you say only have an ultimate purpose, but don't know your role, but maybe you'll have like desires that just don't apply to that role, or you don't know how your desires match up to the ultimate purpose, right? Then it's not going to work, right? You're going to feel purposelessness, meaninglessness. Or let's say the vice versa, that you understand ultimate purpose, you have a connection to that ultimate purpose with a designated role, but you feel no connection to that role. Your personality, the way that you live does not connect to that role. Well, then you're also going to feel meaninglessness or purposelessness. So purpose is, in a sense, all three of those need to be check marked in order to work. In fact, I would honestly say only two of those need to be check marked, which is a sense of purpose outside of yourself and a understanding that you as an individual can contribute to that purpose outside of yourself. I think those are the two things that need to be in place. And I know that if you guys have ever heard of Dr. K, he talks a lot about like psychology online. And one of the things he mentions specifically when it comes to purpose, because, you know, we're in a purpose crisis right now. A lot of people feel like there's no purpose or meaning or direction for themselves. And so the thing that he says, which I think is really fascinating, is that in addition to being connected to a purpose outside of yourself, there needs to be a sense of recognition about the role that you are playing, the work that you're doing toward that purpose. If you don't have recognition, then there will be some sense of burnout. There can be. And it doesn't have to be recognition by a large amount of people. In fact, you could be hated by most people. But as long as you have one person who recognizes you, that's all you need. And I just found that aspect to be very fascinating. So again, purpose is, to me, you can have purpose without an ultimate purpose, but you cannot have purpose without a reason for doing things that is outside of yourself, and without a connection to that reason that works with who you are as an individual. So I got a few chats here. Let me pull them up. Okay. Oh, hey, Beanstalk. I can't say that on stream, but what's up, bro? Good to see you. Good to see you. Riley says, you are not worthy to speak directly to God. Catholics think that people who talk like that are high on themselves. I'm sick with COVID and I've had a tough week. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Dang. COVID sucks, bro. COVID sucks. But yeah, that's crazy. That whole kind of notion of not being worthy to kind of speak directly to God. That's an interesting one. But yeah, on this question of purpose though, I think that's really what we're looking at. You can have a sense of self-purpose, and I think that's really all that matters. As long as that purpose for yourself is outside of just serving yourself, but also attached to who you are as an individual. Those two need to be need to be there in order for it to function.
Most of the time, they don't want to murder people. They don't want to lie to people.
Sorry, I think my audio went out there for a second, so let me go back.
Up with the public morality most of the time. They don't want to murder people. They don't want to lie to people. They don't want to cheat. but they recognize that that's just something they don't want to do. They feel that like there's no moral import there, and they think that because of the fact that this God has been stripped from their worldview. Would you say to them something like, well, you're correct, but, or would you say something more like, you're incorrect and here's why? And what advice would you give to such a person?
If the person still has the moral inclinations to live their life in a way which doesn't negatively affect them or society, do I need to give them advice?
Well, this is where I talk about the spiritual health, because they could find themselves, well, they want to avoid committing crimes, they want to avoid murdering, they want to avoid cheating, but they see themselves as just kind of following their desires. They see themselves as just chasing after the wind, you know. They see it all as, they're happy to engage in it, but much like Kohelet, they kind of chase after pleasures, they deny their eyes and ears no pleasures that they desire, but upon looking at the work of their hands, they see it all as just meaningless. It's like, it's not quite sadness, it's not depression, it's more just...
It's more like a chasing after the wind sort of deal going on.
This sigh of, there's nothing to this. And it upsets them, not in such a way that they're going to start like acting out. They're not just suddenly going to start going against their desires and start murdering people, but they start to feel like a kind of biological machine, just programmed to go through the motions, and it fills them with a sense of nihilism. So you don't need to intervene in the sense of there's like a problem because they're about to go around harming themselves or harming other people, but just that there's something inside of them, there's this lack of spirituality that they used to have, which is making them feel nihilistic. I mean, can you relate to that? Do you think that it's irrational? Do you think it makes sense? And do you think there's anything someone can do to get out of it that doesn't just seem like trying to talk themselves out of it for the sake of it?
I would say to that person that mental health doesn't ultimately come from some enlightened state that you experience within your being. It comes from your relationships to other people and honestly your daily routine. I think that happiness comes from between, not from within.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of somebody who thinks to themselves, let's say you're kind of in this nihilistic rut, and somebody says to you, well, did you know that if you were to start eating breakfast at a regular time every morning, waking up at the same time, getting exercise in, making sure you get outside, you'll feel a lot happier. And they said to you, well, the problem to me isn't the happiness. I know full well that I could do that. The problem to me is that whether I'm happy or sad seems to be of no consequence. It's a very kind of specific kind of despair and trouble that a person goes through, because it's not quite wanting to be happy, but recognizing a kind of indifference towards happiness and an ultimate meaningless in being happy.
Yeah.
And so they know full well that they can make themselves feel a bit happier by running through these motions, but they see it all as hevel. Do you, I mean, is this something you've ever experienced at any point, being an atheist?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've experienced, and I can only speak for myself, but for me, that experience was missing something that I once had, that I had come to rely on. This piece of technology, basically, that I was using in order to help myself get through things emotionally. I missed that when I stopped engaging in that, or when I stopped believing it. And it was really difficult, but the longer I went without it, the more the skills that I developed in maintaining my own mental health filled in that gap. And maybe you could say that there's still a gap there. I don't know if it's completely filled in or not. I haven't had any moments of really intense despair in quite a long time now.
If somebody were to...
That's pretty fascinating. I know that Drew has several, videos where he talks about his own testimony, and I remember listening to one where he kind of expressed that same idea when he was struggling with his faith and was debating whether or not to deconvert. one of the lingering questions was, well, if I deconvert, then there's no ultimate purpose to life. And then I might as well, commit suicide. I might as well kill myself. And I don't want to do that. And then he thought to himself, he's like, wait, but there's a lot of people that are atheists and they don't feel that pressure. And then he came to the realization that, oh, that pressure was handed to me through religion to find a ultimate purpose or meaning to things. That's not a pressure that is just intuitive to the human experience, but it's a pressure that religion gives. That's what he says. And I think that's a pretty interesting idea. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I do agree in the sense that it can be something that you depend on, right? An ultimate purpose or ultimate sort of reason for being can be something you depend on as a person. And so when that's taken away from you, it's hard to find that purpose within. It's hard to do that because it's always been sort of granted to you, and it's potentially an emotional desire that you have because of your past. And so that's a pretty interesting point. What are your guys' thoughts on that, though? Because I am leaning on agreeing with that, but I do understand that Alex's point, and I think he's going to push here a little bit, which is, okay, but let's say there really is no reason to anything, and there is no necessary right or wrong. What is wrong about, just giving up on everything and, ending your life, your existence, or anything like that? I'm not saying you should, but what would be necessarily wrong about that with this kind of perspective? So I think, I don't know. I think they both bring up fair points.
To say that they're not really convinced that God exists, but they're willing to take a kind of Pascalian wager. That is, they say, well, I figured out that if I just go to church...
Not what I thought it was going. Okay. I think Pascal's wager is on the bingo sheet. Do I have it on mine? Let me pull it up here real quick. Might be. Yeah, let's see. I do not have Pascal's wager. But if you have Pascal's wager on your bingo sheet, go ahead and mark it off.
Every single week, join a prayer group, study the Bible, read only Christian literature, specifically avoid listening to criticisms, unsubscribe from your channel. The likelihood is I'll end up talking myself into Christianity. Mm-hmm. This is just how human psychology works. Yeah. I'll end up believing this in some way or another, and I think I'll be a lot happier doing so. But in this position, before I take this step, I know that I'm essentially fooling myself, but at that point it won't matter because I'll just be convinced that it's true. And I'm about to do this. I'm about to just fool myself into believing something that I don't think is true for the sake of my own spiritual well-being. How would you react?
I don't think I would scorn them in the way that some people might expect when I've advocated for skepticism and more rationalism in the past. I would understand why they would want to do that, and I don't think it would necessarily be a harmful thing for them to do. For some people, that might be the optimum existence. That might be good for some people. For me, I don't feel like it is, but I can't speak for other people. It would be difficult to warn such a person of the moral pitfalls of putting on the blindfold, of engaging morally and getting your moral understanding from something that assumes the supernatural. It would be really difficult to warn them of how they may hurt other people in doing so. It sounds like in that scenario that I wouldn't necessarily be able to warn them off of it. So practically speaking, what I would say is I think that danger and extremism harming your outgroup often comes from having a seriously insulated existence. You're only engaging with people who confirm your biases. You're not engaging with people who challenge you, both morally and cognitively, logically, however you want to put it. So I would say go ahead, and if that gives you meaning, if that makes you feel better, sure, do it, but I would ask you not to cut off all influences from the outside.
I wonder how you react in real life situations. you know, I do philosophy. I'm kind of a philosophy enthusiast. I like having arguments, but I'm on the practical side. It's difficult to know when to bring this stuff up, when to discuss this with people, when to sort of advise people that you think they might be going wrong, relative to the harmfulness of their beliefs as you perceive them. On the plane over to Austin from Houston, it was about a half-hour plane. It was very short, but there was a woman next to me looked like she was trying to go to sleep. So I tapped her and said, you know, if you like, you can close the window if you're trying to get to sleep. And she ended up just talking to me, and she told me that she was a Bible teacher in Mexico. I thought, well, that's interesting. I was reading a book on consolation that was looking at the letters of Paul at the time, and we were talking a little bit about the Bible, and it was an edifying conversation. And she said, oh, well, I've got this website, you know, we have this website you should go and check out. It's jw.org. And I didn't really know what to say.
Yeah.
Because running through my mind are the thoughts of the friends that I have who have been excommunicated by their family, the people who have died because they're refused blood transfusions. This is just flashing through my mind.
Yeah, Alex had one of his first conversations with any guest was with a person named Lloyd Evans, who is an ex-JW, and his entire ministry, like what he advocates for, is against the Jehovah's Witness. And so, I could totally see that, because, you know, Alex has deep friendships with people like Lloyd Evans, and I'm sure other people who have been negatively affected by that institution. So that's very fascinating. You know, you can make friends with, like, for instance, let's say you make friends with someone on an airplane, and at the very end they tell you that, you know, they're a part of the Nazi party. If this was like World War II era, how would you respond to that? You know, it'd be kind of an odd thing, but you like made genuine connection and friendship with them. And I think it's probably one of those humbling things that allows you, not to say like that they're right or that their ideology is right or anything like that, but it allows you to see the individual outside of the institutions that they're a part of, instead of labeling people and saying that you believe this, that you are this, and thus I'm against you. That kind of tribalistic mindset, it brings you out of that and kind of sobers you up to a more humble experience, and realizing, oh my God, like, yeah, these institutions I think are very wrong, and I think they're very messed up, but that doesn't mean that every individual involved in it is wrong and messed up. In fact, a lot of these people are victims themselves, or they're just ignorant, or, you know, what have you. And so I think it is one of those things that's going to humble you and probably cause you to think twice about the way that you talk about even your enemies, even people that you are disgusted by.
And we're kind of having a conversation. It's not like just out of the blue. We're talking about, oh, so you're a Jehovah's Witness, because of course that's what the website is. Our listeners might not have realized that, but she was a Jehovah's Witness. And they have these beliefs which I consider to be incredibly harmful. And in that situation on that flight, I don't know whether I might be the only person that she has an opportunity to speak to that could maybe plant some seed of doubt.
Yeah.
Equally, maybe I don't want to kind of try to plant a seed of doubt, but I want to indicate that I'm not all there for it. I might kind of be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not really sure about that. Or whether I should just kind of be like, cool, yeah, I've heard of Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah. What do you do in that situation?
Oh, I've been in that exact same situation before, actually on a plane, but it was coming back from the UK. And I think that what I did in that was to be kind to that person, say, oh yeah, no, I've heard of that. But then tell them about what I do, just not exposing them to what I do in a way of I'm trying to convince them that what I'm doing is great and is better than what they're doing. Just simply exposing them to a different perspective. Because again, I think that extremism often comes from untempered perspectives stemming from an insular moral community with no checks and balances. You can't I don't think that you can argue someone into having major doubts within one plane ride, especially a 30-minute one. Coming back from Heathrow, it was like 9 hours, but maybe I could have done a little bit more. I think the best thing to do is probably just to show them that you are someone who has some different values and that you are as human and as kind and compassionate as they are capable of being. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest seed of doubt you can possibly plant in someone's mind if they come from an extremely insular moral community, to show that you are moral as well.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. If you can show them that kind of aspect of like kindness and charity and love, really like expressing that aspect of love to them, despite the fact that you might be their quote unquote enemy. I mean, that's the, parable of the Good Samaritan, right? The person who helped, the person in need was a Samaritan, someone that would have been considered an enemy in the time to the Jews, and yet they're the only one out of the priest, out of the Levite, to help the person in need, and they were the only one to act like the brother, according to Jesus' story. So I think I think it's a very convincing thing. It's not going to convince anyone to like change or anything like that, but it is going to leave an impression that might be something that sticks with them. Showing love is biblical, to love your enemy. Yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the aspects of Christianity that I love and I aspire to be part of. So I've been exploring consciousness I'm doing this series, watching every Alex O'Connor video. And so obviously consciousness is going to come up. It's kind of the thing that he's talking about a lot more currently. But the thing that I think is interesting in the perspective he's adapting is panpsychism, which is the idea that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. So every kind of aspect of reality is parsed together through fundamental stuff, which he would consider to be consciousness. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. And one of the things that connects with that idea is this idea of oneness, right? If everything is conscious, and this isn't just panpsychism, but this is a lot of spiritual traditions, like in Hinduism, in Buddhism, there's this idea of oneness and unity to all consciousness, all conscious beings. And so when you have that perspective, then you have to sort of follow the golden rule to treat other people the way that you want to be treated, because in these other traditions, they are a part of you. You are them as much as they are you. And so, of course, you're going to treat them with love and care because you want to treat yourself that way. And when you treat them with love and care, in fact, you are treating another aspect of consciousness, which is part of who you are, in that way. So it's an interesting thought mindset there. If you guys have ever seen there's a video on YouTube, you can look it up later, but it's called The Egg. 100%. Look up that video, and it kind of explores that aspect of things and what reality could potentially be if there is this sort of unity to consciousness.
Has there been any point during, I want to say, the course of your channel, because that's probably where you've been mostly engaging with people on this level, but I guess since the beginning of your atheism as a whole, has it ebbed and flowed? Have there been any points at which you felt yourself being even marginally pulled back towards theism or Christianity in particular? Or have you always been quite steadfastly atheist since the day that you became one?
I think as far as my confidence that the supernatural, or specifically God's existence.
Just a comment. Jacob, welcome to the stream. Briefly, what is your background and where are you now spiritually? So my background is as a evangelical Christian. I grew up in the charismatic church. specifically the Assemblies of God denomination. And then I moved when I was in university to a more kind of Southern Baptist perspective on things. But now I've deconstructed all of that, and I would consider myself agnostic, but I'm very open to spiritual beliefs and I enjoy kind of exploring spirituality because it's always been a big part of my life, and so kind of exploring that aspect of things is really beautiful, and it's a way of like better understanding some of the spiritual experiences I've had in my past too. So thanks for asking that. What's yours? What's your background? Love to hear it.
I have always been about the same. Really, the thing that's changed has just been my orientation toward the question of, is it harmful to believe those things if I don't think that there's good reason to think that they're real? So my agnosticism or my atheism hasn't changed much. And in fact, I would say that I think I understand more about the evolution of God, as we were talking about, and that further entrenches me in the, well, I don't think that it can be said that these things definitely are supernatural. It puts me more firmly in the I don't know.
Well, the interesting thing though is ancient expressions of religion didn't have a supernatural notion. Gods would have been part of reality, right? So the gods would be represented in, say, things like thunder or lightning. They'd be represented in woods and trees. They were very much so glued to the physical reality, and not this sort of dualism that we get later on in traditions like the Greek traditions. And so I don't know if I think I get what he's saying here, but the reality is, initially, gods and goddesses were not seen in that way. They were very physical in nature.
No.
You said that your channel is more about the practical import of religion and the social context of becoming an atheist, particularly in the United States, than it is discussing the philosophy of religion or even discussing the truth of religion.
Sorry, I was muted there. Jacob says that I'm 30 now, 0 to 20. I was Baptist by inheritance, but started to understand a lot of high-level questions that a lot of questions couldn't answer. I left and actually watched the two people. Do you mean you left because you were sort of convinced by them, or you left and then they were kind of a part of that deconstruction process and sort of meaning making and finding your group sort of thing? Is that what you mean? Because I think it is a important thing there. You're watching now. I was looking for objective truth. I was not looking for Jesus. I read 3.5 Gospels and I was convinced. Just read the whole Bible last year. Just read the whole Bible last year and it changed my life. That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, there's so much beauty in Scripture, and I think the life transformation of faith is one of the most beautiful parts of religion. So thanks for sharing that, Jacob. I really appreciate that. That's super cool.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say that my channel has become that progressively over time. I don't think it was so much that at the beginning. There was some of that, some of both, but I think it's become a little bit more about the social context of becoming an atheist, yeah.
I wonder if this is something that's true privately as well, as in, do you semi-regularly engage in these arguments? Not in the, because when we're doing it professionally, I suppose, you might engage someone in argument in front of a crowd, or you might be presented with an article that you're expected to respond to in some way. But I think it's very useful to read these philosophical takes and not allow yourself to be in that mindset and just think, let me just read this as a person and see what I actually think. Is that something that you still do as much as you used to, or as your channel moved away from that, do you not do that as much?
Oh, I think I do it more. I think I do it more now. I think it's actually something that has made me more sympathetic to religious perspectives, is doing that, putting myself in the shoes of someone who's trying to come at this, again, like maybe for the first time, or just coming at this as a person, like you said, not as a content creator or as an atheist necessarily. I think because I've done a lot of healing with my own trauma in coming out of religion, I'm able to be more sympathetic. I don't want to say that I'm less biased, because the moment you say that, you come off like a moron. Maybe I am just as biased, but I can appreciate the attraction to these ideas more and can find them beautiful, even though I don't necessarily accept them. I haven't come closer to accepting these ideas as true, but I can appreciate their value.
That's what I was about to ask. When you say something like, you said something to the effect of, I'm becoming sort of more sympathetic towards theism, that can be read in two ways. There's the sympathy of the kind of saying, I understand why somebody would think this. But to me, to say I understand more why someone would think this, I'm more sympathetic to people who believe this, must come from, in some sense, an increase in credence. It must come from something like, oh, well, maybe this is slightly more reasonable than I gave it credit for, and so I understand more why people believe this. So I wonder if you can separate them out in this way. You said that you're more sympathetic towards why people believe, but your credence for God's existence hasn't really increased. How do you square that?
There is a bit of that. I do find some arguments, I used to find every single argument completely irrational and, oh, this is completely logically fallacious or whatever. And I don't think that way so much now. Actually, a lot of that has come from just a few good conversations with a polytheist friend of mine, Ocean Keltoy. I'd have to make sure and shout him out, because he has influenced me to take a second and third and fourth look at a lot of these arguments. Maybe that's why I'm more sympathetic to polytheism than monotheism as well. But
I wanted to read these last things from Jacob because it's super cool. I left Christianity temporarily because no one seemed to answer my question. So I thought it might have just been a system of control, just like the rest of religion. But my perspective changed when my friend said, I consider the world religion to be attached to work-based faith. I'm on a grace alone perspective. Jesus offers everyone a gift, and it's not a gift if you have to do something for it. I didn't join a church right away because I didn't want to join a book club without having read the book first. I wanted to be able to challenge the body if I need be, so that we can keep the body strong. Thank you for talking with me. Yeah, just interesting. I used to watch both these guys separately, and cool that we're discussing Christianity while having them in the mix tonight. Yeah, for sure. I think those... That's a really cool testimony. I have a friend that I think has a very similar story to that too. He left the church for a few years. They kind of deconstructed and left it, and then came back to the faith a few years after. And so, yeah, his version of Christianity looked very different than it initially did, and it sounds kind of like yours looked different. And so that's one thing I talk about. Deconstruction is not the same as deconversion, right? A lot of the time when people use the word deconstruction, it's often at least interpreted or even meant by people in the sense of, I am leaving a religion or leaving a faith or something like that. But deconstruction is really, I use the analogy of a puzzle, right? It's like a puzzle where you start analyzing the structure of the puzzle a little bit closer, and you realize some of the pieces don't quite fit right. They're not in the right spots. And so you take those pieces out and you kind of rearrange them to the point where it starts to fit again and it starts to make sense. And I think it's not like throwing the puzzle into the trash and finding a new puzzle is going to fix everything, but instead it's understanding what those pieces that are not quite fitting right and understanding the right place for them. That's what deconstruction is and why it's really important. So yeah, I think that's good. I'm glad for you, Jacob. That's awesome. For me, my story is different. I am no longer a Christian, but over time, I did deconstruct a lot of different things. I was once a believer that it was always God's will to heal people. I was once a believer that, like Christian apologetics and that the resurrection was historically granted, and like there's no like arguing around that, and over time, those kind of things started to deconstruct. I also thought that, the only way that a life could be transformed in the positive was through Jesus. But I met, a lot of Hindus whose lives were transformed, not through Jesus, but through their own tradition. And so those are some of the things that I had to wrestle with, where the puzzle pieces no longer, fit, no longer worked. And so, since then I've deconstructed and I see, I kind of more look at religion in its connections, and I value the connections between faiths, especially this idea of oneness and becoming one with one another. That's a practice in faith that is very much so shared across several different religions. There's this idea of enlightenment expressed, the idea of gnosis. So these are, in my opinion, the structures behind religion, and so that's what I find currently, at least, to be very interesting. So, yeah, but yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Sure, I find some arguments rational. I think that there are rational ways to come to theistic positions. Do I think that means that they're true necessarily? No. The main way I've become more sympathetic, though, is understanding the psychology of religious belief. That's actually my main interest. People may have seen on my channel that I dive more into religious history and a bit more into religious psychology lately.
Have you guys seen his video on Dune, like the second Dune movie? It's a really good video because he explores religious psychology there quite well and connects some of the religious sects in that movie to Islamic kind of expressions in real life. So it's pretty fascinating what he puts there. But yeah, he talks a little bit about creds, which like religious creds are the idea that you sort of suffer or you experience some sort of pain for what you believe, and that gives you credibility to bolster your faith and credibility in what you're saying, right? Because if you're willing, like Jesus, to be crucified on a cross, that gives him credibility behind what he's saying, religious creds. And so that's a part of the Dune movies, as well as a lot of religions, faiths that, ask you to fast, give up some food for a certain amount of time. That's a religious cred. Faith where you have to, and it's not that you have to, but like it's a way of showing your dedication and your love to God in this way. Religious creds are another thing that seems to be kind of universal from religion to religion, and it's kind of a fascinating deep dive there.
That is the thing that has really tempered my view. I understand why it seems like the vast majority of people for the last few millennia have come to believe in some kind of theistic conception.
When you just talked about speaking to Ocean, giving you a kind of second and third look at particular arguments that you now give slightly more credence to than before. I know that you did this arguments for God tier list before, so you probably already talked about which arguments you sort of find the most compelling and least compelling. But in terms of the change, is there like an example of the kind of thing that someone like Ocean or someone else or anything else in this journey of discovery, is there either a particular argument or like a line of thought or something that's significantly changed since maybe, well, as recent as possible? Yeah. Is there things that have changed in the past few months, past year, the past 5 years? Are there examples that come to mind?
Yeah. I think that I used to call it irrational to base one's belief in God on personal experience. And the reason why I said that is because, I got a degree in psychology, and I was very interested in studying the psychology of religious experiences. And I thought, it's just so incredibly obvious that if you have some kind of spiritual experience, it's uncontrolled. You don't know all the factors that are going in there, and the brain is a powerful thing. It can make you experience things that are taking place entirely within your brain, but feel as if they're not. And so I would call arguments from personal experience, or maybe more specifically, someone's belief in gods, irrational or unreasonable, because I knew that the brain could simulate something like that.
I think he would disagree with, that's what he's about to say, is he's going to disagree with that now. And I would agree that he should disagree with that, because there's a lot of issues in denying your own personal experience and basically disowning that. It creates a cognitive dissonance that your body will not ignore. Like, subconsciously over time, that will deteriorate on you, and there will reach a tipping point where you're going to have to deal with the fact that you've experienced something, and yet you are actively believing something that contradicts that. And so what I think is the best kind of solution to that is to ask questions about that experience and try to understand what exactly that experience was. And just be curious about it. There's no right or wrong answers there, because it's your experience, right? And so ask those kind of qualifying questions and get to the root. What is this thing? What did I experience? And the answer is probably going to be more fascinating than it was initially. And it might confirm what you already believe, or it might lead you down another route. You know, there's a lot of ways that a practice like that can lead to. I would keep a chemistry set on me to undeniably prove it. We live our life on evidence, and for me, the evidence is overwhelming about the resurrection. He said it was going to happen, and then it did. Most of his disciples and family died horrific deaths, and 400 plus people saw him before the ascension. What do you do with this? Does that play a role for you? So, the argument for the resurrection, I did believe in that, and I did find that very convincing for several years. I no longer find it very convincing, mainly because we don't, at least when you ask your average Christian, they don't believe the same thing about things like Marian adaptations, or for the Mormons, the 14 witnesses to the golden tablets of Moroni, right? These are things that are attested to even more in terms of the witnesses than Christianity, because we don't have any primary sources from it. Our earliest source is Paul, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that's the area you're talking about. Verses, I believe it's like 4-8 or something like that. It talks about the appearance before Peter, and then the appearance to James, appearance to the 12, and then it says the appearance to over 500 people at the same time, many who are still alive, right? My main issue with that is he seems to be quoting a church creed that is dated earlier than Paul, so likely an early church creed. However, we know that he's adding to the church creed his own language, because he inputs his own experience. And if the church creed predated him, then his own experience would obviously not be a part of the original church creed. Well, when you study the language there, it seems that is referring to the 500 is not congruent with the language of the church creed, but more congruent with Paul's writing, like linguistic style. And so to me, that's a clue that what he's adding there is something that he probably heard from other people, was not a part of the original church creed. So there's that. And, Paul was not a part of the 500. So the only attestation to this is Paul. He's our earliest attestation to it. And he's not even someone that was a part of it. There's also the idea that in the language, this is something that Dale Allison brings up, which is the idea that in the language of it, he like the original language, it's sort of God appearing in the sky, right? And so the question then is like, is this more like a kind of vision in the sky that people are seeing, or is this like the physical appearance of Jesus, like one of the physical appearances of Jesus post-resurrection to 500 people at the same time? And I think you can make an argument that this is more of that after his like second ascension, that this is an appearance in the sky, which I mean, maybe that's just evidence of something like the Marian appearances that we've had in the 20th century. So that's kind of my thoughts on the resurrection. I think the best explanation, in my personal opinion, is is something that Apologia talks about. He's a fellow creator here, where it would have been a vision of Peter, because every single story starts with Peter. So we have an understanding that Peter probably had some sort of reaction or some sort of experience with a resurrected Jesus, which makes sense psychologically that someone would do that in a mourning process. And then after that, the spread of this belief comes from Peter, and then Paul has some sense of an experience as well. And so it'd be the two had some sort of experience with a what they believe to be a post-resurrected Jesus, and then everyone else followed from that. And I think that makes sense because our earliest source is Paul, and he doesn't really mention anything except for that church creed in terms of the attestations, and a lot of the early church appearances, post-resurrection appearances of Jesus are actually in the synoptic Matthew and Luke, and then in John, and not in Mark at all. So that was kind of a lot of information at once, but that's my main thing. 300 prophecies from the Old Testament completed in addition to the rest. Yeah, I mean, that one, I think we're getting a lot of post hoc stuff. A lot of those prophecies, have dual interpretation. Like, for instance, Isaiah 9:6, unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor. I might be misquoting that, but no, Isaiah 9:6 is the virgin will conceive and give birth to a child. That's what it is. So that one is in reference to King Hezekiah. We know that historically that's talking about King Hezekiah. The virgin is not like in the Greek. Virgin would mean virgin, but in the non-Greek Septuagint, instead in the Hebrew versions of the Old Testament, that word is more used for young lady and not virgin specifically. And so that would fit Hezekiah, who Isaiah would have been very close to. He was a prophet to Hezekiah's father. And then once Hezekiah became king, he was a person to help King Hezekiah. And so it would make sense for that to be a lot more sense historically for that to be a reference to Hezekiah than it would be to Jesus. But it is applied to Jesus in Matthew's gospel. And so that's, to me, it's a lot of post hoc where they're taking things that were not meant to be prophecies from the Old Testament and then saying that they were prophecies in the New Testament, or it's things where they're saying it's a dual prophecy, like dually, what's the word? Dually attested for prophecy. So it's a prophecy about two different situations at once. And I mean, you can have that. I believe that as a Christian, but I'm a lot more skeptical of that. So I don't think it's silly to believe that, but there are a lot of questions that don't quite add up in terms of those specific arguments, apologetic arguments. So that's what I would say. And obviously apologetics are not going to convince someone. I think what really convinces someone, and this is my own experience, is the experience that you have. If you have a transformed life through a religious experience, that's going to beat any apologetic argument. So that's my thought on the matter.
Now I say that, and maybe it's semantics, but it's not irrational. It's not unreasonable to conclude that gods exist or that you're having a real spiritual experience that's taking place, not just entirely in your own brain, if that subject is not something that you're extremely well versed in, and the vast majority of people are not. For me, it might go against certain bits of information that I understand to believe that I'm experiencing or I'm communing with gods when I'm experiencing something spiritual. But for the vast majority of people, that's not the case. At the same time, I'm sure there are many subjective value claims that are going into my understanding of the entire issue of what a spiritual experience is, what that looks like. And so it's not that I think that there is some extremely convincing argument for God, or I've examined, the work of William Lane Craig, and I think it's more convincing than I used to. It's more like I just think that there are different brain states than my own, and I don't think someone's being irrational for coming to a different conclusion if theirs is different than mine. It doesn't mean that I think that they're correct necessarily, but calling them irrational and just flatly delusional in the God delusion kind of way is not me anymore. No.
Yeah, there's this religious experience element of confusing, I think, somebody coming to belief through religious experience, which I think makes perfect sense and is, in my view, the only real way that I think I certainly would ever be able to come to religious belief, would be through some personal experience. And that's oftentimes when you ask somebody, what would convince you that God exists, even when they answer it sarcastically and say, well, God writes his name across the sky or something. This is a form of religious experience.
Yeah.
And so people seem to implicitly recognize this. And you imply that you've become a bit, well, there's confusing that with using religious experience as an argument as to why other people should believe in God.
Yeah.
In a debate context, if somebody says, well, here's a religious experience that occurred either to me or to the apostles or to, Saul of Tarsus, and from that we can conclude that the best explanation is that religion is accurate or that God exists. I think that confusion is an important one, because you can say that form of argument is terrible and indeed irrational, without saying that forming a personal belief on the basis of a personal experience is itself irrational.
Right.
I wonder if there's anything in this entire realm of argument, which I know you say you're kind of moving away from or don't talk about as much now, but if you say you're kind of looking at it privately, I wonder, maybe there isn't, I'm not sure, but of any of the kind of approaches, contingency arguments and fine-tuning arguments, ontological arguments, is there anything that you think is somewhat plausible, or is there anything in that body of thought, not in terms of the rationality of another person coming to belief from a psychological perspective, but in terms of your own views, is there anything that's changed in that arena, something that you used to think that for yourself, this is never going to convince me, and now you think, well, it still doesn't convince me, but maybe I need to give it a bit more thought?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those for me would be, I've been exploring the argument from motion, which has been pretty interesting. That's Thomas Aquinas's one of his 5 ways arguments, and it comes from Aristotelian physics, and motion not meaning motion in the movement of objects through space, but motion in the sense of change. So the argument from How Things Change. Sorry, I see there's a few comments. Let's see. Even Jesus, when talking, is usually meant with double meaning, which would actually coincide with what you're saying versus disproving it. So, yes, that is the case. But I think the question should be not whether Jesus has double meaning, but the question should be whether Jewish literature generally meant for things to have double interpretation behind things. And that's not a common thread in Jewish literature, especially in the Hebrew Bible. So that would be my main concern with that. But I mean, if you believe that Jesus is God and he's behind it, then I think that's a good explanation. But I just don't have that grounding, so I don't think that that's a good argument with that being the case. Does that kind of make sense? I love talking with people who have a different of opinion, so I'm not in echo chamber. Yeah, no, it's really good. That's exactly what they were talking about. I would consider myself any denomination, just simply a follower of the way of the Bible. Minus the murder, I had a Saul to Paul story arc, I would say. I would ridicule Christians within those few years. I wasn't a part of it, and now I'm one of the biggest advocates for it. I'm using speech to text to talk to you quickly. So sorry yeah. There's another creator I've seen that he has like an open come join the stream thing. I'm looking into doing that. I think I stream through OBS, so I think I might have to stream through something else like StreamYard or something. But with these, I do find it kind of tough because you guys have to text and then I could just like freely talk. And I understand that that's a lot more difficult to get your things out in a way that is representative in like the limited number of characters that it gives you per post. So, yeah, I want to look into that because I think that'd be cool to kind of invite people on and then have like an actual conversation. So, but I have been really enjoying your input. It's super cool. Yeah, just hearing your story is super, super awesome. And, I appreciate you sharing that with all of us. So, text to speech it's tough. It's tough. It's getting better though these days. I can understand you at least. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jacob.
I can't think of any specific arguments for theism that I found more credible in the way that we're talking about, not just for an individual, but largely
for you.
I wouldn't say so, but that also may have to do with the fact that I study those things less now, and I study the psychology of it a lot more, the history of religion, the psychology of religion more. That may be something that I have to get back to you on.
Sure. And so you're the sort of future of the channel of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Can we expect to see more in terms of psychological analyses of religious belief, more about, you've been doing a lot on like history recently, the history of the canonization process and the Gospels and this kind of thing. Is that what we can expect more of, or is there other stuff that you've got kind of in the works? Like, what's the approach that you see the channel?
And they're kind of moving on to the next topic, but for me, one of the arguments in favor of God's existence that I've actually found to be a lot more intriguing. I mentioned it earlier, but Thomas Aquinas's argument from motion, which is an argument which works from Aristotelian physics. So basically, the idea is that in Aristotle's view, that change occurs when a thing that is actualized, meaning a thing that actually exists. So like this coffee cup, this is a thing that exists and is currently existing in the state that it's in. If that thing has a potential, right? So like this coffee cup could be painted yellow. It's blue right now, but it could be painted yellow. So as a potential of the coffee cup, it could be yellow. And so if that becomes actualized, meaning this coffee cup becomes yellow, that is a change. That is in his words, a motion that occurs. And that motion must be actualized by something that is actual, right? And so the only things that are actual are conscious, right? And what he means by actual is something that exists in the state that it's in, but also exists in a self-guided way. So it has a sense of like free agency to it. And so Aristotle then concludes that God is pure actuality, meaning that he is pure existence, and that everything that exists is foundational to him as the thing that is actualizing every other potential in reality. So nothing is guaranteed but God, who is pure actuality, and because of his pure actuality, he makes every potential that becomes actual, he makes that actual, right? And so you can then sort of, you get to God though, because, for instance, things like a microphone, right? So I have this microphone and it stands on a stand, right? And so this microphone, it's actualized, it exists as it is, but it's not really something that exists and is like floating in the air on its own. That is a state of it, right? In actuality, it is kind of floating in the air, but that quality of it being actualized is dependent on what? It's dependent on the arm. And the arm is attached to the table that I am currently working from, right? And so the mic is dependent upon the arm is dependent upon the table is holding up all of this by the ground. The ground is being held up by the foundation of the building that I'm in. The foundation of this building is being held up by the ground of the earth. The ground of the earth is being held up by gravity, and so on and so forth, until you get to what is holding everything together, and that would be God. And the reason that's a little bit more convincing than, say, like the Kalam cosmological argument is because the thing that's holding things up is all happening at one moment, right? So Kalam cosmological argument is basically the idea that like what caused the existence of everything, right? If there's like anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe has a cause. Thus, the universe began to exist. Thus, the universe has a cause. That's the Kalam cosmological argument. So that works from a timeline perspective, so a temporal perspective, where one event causes another event, causes another event, causes another event. Now, we can talk about the Big Bang as evidence in favor of that or not, but Thomas Aquinas says, look, the universe could technically be infinite. That's what he proposed. So he was like, let's not talk about causation in the temporal sense to prove God's existence, because the universe very well could be infinite. But instead, let's look at causation in terms of its horizontal view, in that what is sort of holding things together, what is holding together the present moment, the present activity of reality, the present actualization of reality. What is holding all of that together? And it can't be humans. Now, we do have agency, right? So we can actualize things, according to Thomas Aquinas. However, we are not eternal. We do not have actualization eternally. We also change and have our own sort of potentials. And so because of that, we cannot be the grounds for reality. So then the question becomes, what is the grounds for everything? What at the very base of everything is holding up this microphone? That actualization process, according to Thomas Aquinas, is God. And I find that to be an interesting argument. And to me, I think it's it's one of the ones I'm kind of processing through right now. Obviously, that doesn't lead you to the Christian God according to a lot of like Christian beliefs, but it does lead you to a God that cares about how things happen, which is unique, which means that he has a vested interest in how events occur. Doesn't necessarily mean he's personal, but it does mean that he cares about how things occur. So that's an interesting thing. So it's not like this sort of God of ultimate consciousness like in Buddhism or Hinduism, but a God who is intentionally caring about how things play out. So that would be one argument that I find kind of intriguing these days, the argument from motion from Thomas Aquinas. So sorry, that was kind of a lot of philosophy and terms, and I went through it kind of quick, but hopefully that made sense to you guys.
Channel going in.
Yeah, I'll definitely be keeping the personal approach, talking about my own experience and my own healing process. That will remain in my content. But in speaking about the history of religion, yeah, I hope to ramp that up quite a bit. And a big part of that is not just doing all the writing myself. I've worked with a scholar, Dr. Ian Mills, who is actually a Christian himself, in making religious education videos. So intertwining my...
Okay. Do you hold to a creator position, just not sure what that creator is? You don't need to the builder to know he built your house. Same for the universe and God. I mean, so that's a little bit different. I lean on believing that the universe is, and by universe, I mean more like kind of like the multiverse. So, not just like the known universe, but like anything that's outside of that, is sort of eternal. So I don't know if there is a creator, but I don't think it's unlikely to think that there's a God. It depends on how you define God. I don't personally believe that there's a sort of personal God that like cares about us, like as humans specifically. But I do think there's potentially a God who cares about conscious or sentient beings. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I obviously am very agnostic on the matter, and change my mind very frequently. But in terms of like, if there's a God, what do I think is more likely? I think it's probably a God who's not human centric, but a God who is kind of more universal centric to things. And so it's not quite deism, because I do think he does care about consciousness specifically. Of course, I do think the problem of evil is the best sort of hiccup to that thought process. But I hear you. He is the uncaused cause. So depends on what you mean by cause, because that's working from a little bit more of the Kalam type of argumentation or contingency type of argumentation. What I mean is a undergirding to present reality. That's more what I'm referring to. So, but yeah. Anyway, that's the technical terms. So I hear what you mean.
My personal journey and the narrative of my personal journey with telling stories about religious history and explaining the mechanisms of religious psychology. That's what you should expect. Hopefully I can pull it off in the way that I'm envisioning in my head.
Yeah, one can hope. I wonder, because producing the kind of content that's supposed to normalize atheism, as I say, make people feel safe in being an atheist. You encouraged earlier people to make sure that they keep one foot in both camps, at least a little bit, to make sure they're not being too insular.
Yeah.
But of course, for a lot of people, especially if you're religious and questioning and you find a lot of meaning in Christianity, I guess there are two questions that I wanted to put to you. The first is, if somebody says that maybe they're a Christian, but they're something of like a fragile Christian, and they think that if they start exposing themselves to other arguments, it might just undermine their Christianity, but they're incredibly scared. Maybe they've looked a little bit at some of the work of atheists, and they've started to kind of get to them a bit, and they've stopped and they said, I need to be careful here because I might end up as an atheist. They just don't want that for themselves. Yeah. They really, they're terrified. Does that person have some kind of like obligation to keep engaging with it anyway? Or do you think they're justified in becoming a bit more insular? I mean, I guess I'm asking, how far does a person have to go? I mean, you could be a Christian who watches the Atheist Experience every Sunday and say, yeah, I like to keep up to date with the atheist argument. It's like, is that like enough? Is that a bit too surface level? Like, but then you...
I don't know. My interpretation of what Drew was saying there is not necessarily the arguments, but in terms of culture, right? Because he's talking about religious extremism, which is where you get super stuck in one perspective or one point of view, that you start to see anyone with a different point of view as almost anti your group. And I think that's really the danger here. So I would probably rethink this. Like it's not necessarily about the intellectual side. Like I think people have very real, surreal moments with the supernatural potentially, and for them to just throw that away because they've heard an argument, like I think that's kind of a ridiculous thing to do. So what I think is probably more helpful, and probably more what Drew is suggesting here, is to surround yourself with people who disagree with you, not because you have to like study all their arguments. Like if you're interested in that, go ahead. But I think it's more just so you can understand that people who disagree with you are human too, and are able to be friendly and cordial with you, and you can be friends with them, and you can have like connections with them. They can challenge you, and you can start thinking about things not so much in the extreme, but in a way that is a little more grounded and what's the word? A little bit more like, I don't want to say compromise, because that has like negative connotation, but like compromise in the sense of like for the sake of a relationship, but not necessarily like compromise in terms of intellectual assent. So anyway, I think that's really the importance of being around people who disagree with you. It allows for that kind of relationship to happen. Heard something the other day. We will become what we were never meant to be as a created being, which is a child of God. Thought that died nicely into what you just said about being created. God is the one being that in three persons. He is the wording's so small. He is completed within himself and does not lack anything. We are not created out of necessity, but out of want. I do believe that we don't choose him. He chooses us. We are only capable of loving him because he loved us first. He is a God that is all loving, just, selfless love. Can't help but give to something outside of itself by the definition of selfless. Yeah, no, those are cool. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, for sure. But yeah, I think that's more what Drew is talking about here is exposing yourself so that you don't get so consumed in the culture that you're in and start seeing people who disagree with you as kind of the enemy, or like the cultural, like they're the reason that there's cultural problems in society and things like that. That becomes really dangerous and can lead to a lot of prejudice and expressions of that.
Wouldn't be advising people that they haven't done enough until they've like read every entry on the SEP on the relevant argument. It's like, how can you know if you're doing enough? And what if there's somebody who just doesn't want to do that for fear of losing something very important to them?
Addressing the first bit of that is difficult because I don't think I can propose a model of perfect epistemic responsibility. But to the person who is incredibly afraid of engaging with things outside of their moral community and maybe tempering their views a bit, I would say that that fear is something that comes from your insular moral community itself. And rather than coming from a genuine, your brain or whatever, genuinely warning you that something might be wrong, there might be a real threat, it's a bit of technology. It's a bit of social technology that insular moral groups use to keep people insular, to keep people in those groups. So I would say that if you engage with people outside of your group, you temper your views a bit, that fear will actually subside. It seems like it's going to get worse. When I first started really questioning, I felt like I was dangling over a pit that I couldn't see the bottom of. But once I decided, I'm going to let go of this branch and drop into it, I realized my feet were kind of on the ground already. There was no real drop. That's what I want to tell someone that is struggling there. Perfect epistemological responsibility, I can't dish out. I can't tell you how to do that. But being afraid to question what you think I don't think it's particularly warranted.
What advice would you give to somebody who is, maybe they're on the fence, but for kind of want of trying, they just haven't really engaged with this kind of stuff before? Maybe they're a devout Christian or a Muslim or some other religious persuasion, and they think to themselves, yeah, you're right. Like, okay, maybe I should start questioning this kind of stuff. What does this look like in practice? Where does a person start? What's the first thing about the belief to question, and where do they go to question it?
I think the first step of that is not surrounding yourself with people who exclusively confirm your biases. It's not going and learning about logical fallacies or cognitive biases or something. It's really not what critical thinking looks like. I think that atheist YouTube has been responsible for perpetuating the idea that you're a critical thinker if you understand logical fallacies, which people of all stripes are able to understand those quite well.
Which most people actually don't. Most of the time when a logical fallacy is brought up, it's misquoted, or it's not even a logical fallacy. It's just a fallacy, but it's not a logical fallacy, because for it to be a logical fallacy, there has to be something wrong with the syllogism that is being presented. But if the syllogistic logic, there is no problem with the syllogistic logic, then there's no logical fallacy. But you could say that it's like an informal fallacy, which those do exist. Things like straw man, those would be the informal, or ad hominem attacks, stuff like that is a informal fallacy, but it's not a logical fallacy where you are making an argument that is not valid or unsound.
Well, and apply them well. Having a community around you that differs in their paradigm about whatever important issue you want to become a little bit more objective on. So the first step is surrounding yourself with people with a diversity of views. From there, reading a diversity of literature. Hard for me to exactly recommend how to find something.
Jacob says, I feel subjective reality is secondary to objective, and I feel that's primarily what's hurting society, is everyone living in their own truth. I feel subjective reality is secondary to objective reality, and I feel that's primary. Do you mean that subjective reality is primary over objective morality, and that's what's hurting things because people feel that there's their own truth, not the other way around? Is that what you meant? Because if you had a problem with subjective reality being secondary, then there would be no problem with people having their own truth in a subjective sense. Which, to me, I hate pitting them together against each other. This is my non-realist perspective here, but I think there's a sense of unwarranted trust we have in human senses. There are a lot of examples, especially in other species, that the human senses are not meant to give us a real depiction of reality, but instead give us, shortcuts to understanding ultimate reality, oftentimes in a way that is just not true. Like, for instance, color. We perceive color, like this blue cup, as a product, as a quality of the mug itself. But in reality, there is no such thing as blueness to this mug. We figured out that color is the reflection of light rays off of an object. So this object has no such thing as blueness, and yet that's how we perceive it, right? So even things like the scientific method, I think, have a bias toward the human senses. Whereas if we were to conduct science from the perspective of like the subjective experience of an ant, we would come to very different conclusions because they have very different senses. Or a bat who can do echolocation, that would lead to very different conclusions. And so our binocular perspective of vision in reality gives us an understanding of reality, but not a true understanding of ultimate reality. What would give us a better, more objective understanding of ultimate reality would be to coincide the view of ants, the view of bats, the subjective experience of all these kind of conscious beings. How do they perceive things visually? How do they perceive things through sound? How do they perceive things that we don't even perceive, like the magnetic field? Like pigeons, they have a sense of magnetic north. Like, we have no understanding of that qualia, and yet we say that we do because we have the scientific method. And so I'm not saying that the scientific method is wrong or bad or should be questioned, but what I do think we do, which is wrong, is we put too much faith in the scientific method. Because what it really is measuring is not objective morality or objective reality. Science gives us a mapping of our shared human subjective experience. So scientific experiments lead us to concluding what humans understand subjectively as a collective species. But we have no idea the subjective experience of other animals. We only understand it from the perspective of ourselves observing their reality, but we don't understand their reality itself. So I'd like to do more research into that because I think that would probably lead us further into a better understanding of ultimate reality. But we just know that we are not seeing ultimate reality as it actually is, which to then assume that science is perfect and is leading us to perfect conclusions about ultimate reality, I think that's silly, in my opinion. The subjective is caused by the objective. So that one is difficult because I don't think we ever experience or even measure the objective, right? I think we measure a shared subjective experience, right? So our understanding of, say, like general relativity is based upon the understandings of mathematics and the pondering of mathematics, as well as the shared subjective experience through human testing, right? And multiple tests. But all of these tests are filtered through the human subjective experience. And so that's what I'm kind of getting at. I don't think we ever truly observe objective reality. I think we only observe a shared subjective human reality. And that could be leading us to making a lot of conclusions that are incorrect. So that's kind of what I mean. Have you dived into Planck time space in matter? I have not. I'd be curious. I'm not sure what that is. Ryan science only can observe what is there. It cannot explain the phenomena itself, like gravity, for example. Yeah, that's exactly what Newton talked about when he discussed Newtonian physics and came up with gravity as a force. At the very end, he says, to what gravity actually is, I have no idea. And I think that is kind of the basis of everything. We don't actually know what things are. We just know when we push the problem back as far as it goes, we just know what it does. We don't know what things actually are, which is a problem. And I think our definition of what things are has to be filtered through a subjective experience. That's how we define what a thing is, right? So I can describe a lot of things about this mug, but to understand what the mug is, I have to experience it in my presence. So hold it, use it in some sense, and understand what it's like for it to, be filled with coffee and for that temperature to feel a little bit of sting, right? That is what things are, which is separate to how things operate, what things do. And so science tells us what things do, but it can't totally define what a thing is in and of itself. Planck time, Planck space, and Planck matter are the pixels of the universe. You can give any smaller or the unit breaks down. You can't get any smaller or the unit breaks down. It's the bedrock of existence from a measurement standpoint. Okay, so like kind of fundamental, elementary sort of building blocks is what you're talking about there. Yeah, okay. I've heard that before, so that kind of makes sense. So it'd be something like a quark or an electron then, which is like the smallest quantum particle that we know of. It'd be something kind of like that, I'm assuming, the building blocks for everything. So that makes sense. I'm gonna continue the video here.
Something that's particularly reputable, but I guess
I'm imagining somebody sort of watching at home who says, okay, like, yeah, I want to question this, but maybe they just live in an insular community, because you can say, well, start hanging out with atheists or something, but they don't know any atheists. Where are they going to find an atheist? And even so, how are they going to like just inject themselves into their like social group? So maybe for some reason that's kind of off the cards, and all they really have is like the internet. They have an internet connection. Maybe they have access to a library. It's like, sure, so you could read a book about the psychology of religion. You could read a book about the history of Christianity. You could read a book about philosophical arguments for the existence of God. You could read a book or watch a video or a podcast about whether there can be objective morality without God, because maybe that's one of your big problems. I wonder what you think somebody should start with.
God, this is me seriously tooting both of our own horns. YouTube is actually not a bad place to start. Starting with educational content on YouTube is kind of great. It's extremely accessible to people that.
With that, you guys can subscribe to the channel and hear conversations with experts on the topic of science, religion, and philosophy. I interview experts in that field, generally scholars, but it can also be, spiritual people and stuff like that too. But experts on the intersection of science, religion, and philosophy. And if that sounds interesting to you, I drop podcast episodes every single month, so you can subscribe for that. I got a follow-up video for the Shroud of Turin coming out with Hugh Ferry. So that'll be my next topic, which is a very interesting topic.
Are of various levels of education. And there are people out there that are trying to reach diverse audiences, have people like this in mind when they're creating their educational content. So starting on YouTube with, if you want to learn about the history of religion, the YouTube channel Religion for Breakfast, taught by Dr. Andrew Henry, fantastic place to start. If you are a Christian, you want to learn about some of the, I won't say skeletons in the closet, but some things that were a little bit more inconvenient for mainline sects to talk about, look up Esoterica, fantastic channel, Dr. Justin Sledge. If you're an atheist, check out Reasonable Faith.
That's good.
I think starting
I like
on
it.
YouTube, starting with that content, the content that is popping up faster and faster now, is great, and you will find pieces of literature that are a bit more fleshed out from there. I mean, I only found out about the work of Jonathan Haidt because some YouTubers recommended it to me. I consumed a bunch of psychology videos and eventually found out about the righteous mind. And if anyone can't tell, based on what I've said so far, the righteous mind, Jonathan Haidt's work, has seriously influenced me and actually kind of almost single-handedly turned me from being an anti-theist to not so much.
That almost preempts
cool.
my next and probably final question, which was going to be about essentially a book recommendation. I was going to say, if there's one book that you could put in the hand of a believer, and I suppose maybe one book or other kind of literature that you could put in the hands of an atheist, and I'm imagining an atheist who hasn't really engaged and a believer who hasn't really engaged, what would they be? Would it be The Righteous Mind?
I think it would be The Righteous Mind for both. Yeah, it's specifically for the atheist, at least. Reading the chapter, Religion is a Team Sport, near the end of the book, the last third of the book, is fantastic. There's quite a bit of information that, if you really want to absorb what that chapter says, that you learn beforehand, which precedes that chapter in the book, but can change you from thinking that religion is just a set of pernicious memes and acts solely as a parasite in the way that I think the God delusion made a lot of us think, to thinking, oh, religion might be adaptive. And that doesn't mean that religion is perfectly acceptable and great and we shouldn't criticize it in any way for any reason. No, just tempering your perspective and realizing maybe religion is a bit more complicated than I originally thought. I should engage with this in a more nuanced way, realizing that deconverting people isn't necessarily the moral good that I was thinking that it.
So to those who don't understand, just making the argument's sake, not looking to be disrespectful, but they're saying to always consider others even though you've already found it. What's the point of searching for truth if once you find it, you throw it away looking for the next shiny object, like the shiny ball effect? Yeah, I mean, I think I actually agree with you there, Jacob. I think it's good to expose yourself to ideas and kind of be open to exploring ideas, because it's not like you find ultimate truth and then you have an answer for everything, but it's like maybe you find an answer to like ultimate truth, but then you have a question about like how does the Trinity exactly work, or how does what does it really mean to love my neighbor in this specific circumstance, or hey, there's this sort of connection between this denomination and this denomination. what does that connection exactly mean, and how can I learn a little bit more about it? It can be exploring within the faith, but I think what at least what I would suggest is more to surround yourself with people who disagree with you, so that you can have more empathy with those people. So it's not necessarily about like changing your mind or trying to get yourself full of conflicting ideas and stuff like that. But really it's about being open-minded and allowing yourself to be surrounded by other people so that you can have more empathy and like understanding of them and their perspective. So I to me, that's more what I think is important, because I do find a lot of groups that are extreme and kind of on the fundamentalist side to be problematic. I think that can cause a lot of damage to the people in that group. Like for instance, they talked about worrying about, questioning your faith or changing your mind. Like that can be a very big worry for people. And if that's a concern, well, that might be a more concern about your context, the environment that you're in, because that should not be a concern. Exploring new ideas and trying to understand different perspectives should not be concerning if what you believe is true, right? So that's more what I mean. What I would suggest. What they're saying, I think, is if you don't have a place where you can find people who disagree with you, maybe you're in like an area where pretty well everyone is the same kind of background and culture. You can explore places online that way. But that's more what I think is important. Are you surrounded by people that disagree with you, but you can be like friendly with and understand? You're the summation of the 5 people you hang out most with. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, who are your friends? That will tell me exactly who you are as a person. It's good. I like it.
It was.
Well, I will make sure that the Righteous Mind is linked in the description, so that anybody watching this on YouTube can go down and purchase it if they haven't read it already. As I will also make sure that any other things that are referenced or talked about that are relevant will be linked in the description, including, of course, your own channel, Genetically Modified Skeptic. People can find you on YouTube if they haven't already. And, of course, other social media accounts, Twitter. Don't know if you're a big user of...
I'm basically off other forms of social media. I've really just focused on YouTube for a while.
Good for you. Social media is a hellhole that I'm trying to dig myself out of every single day. But YouTube's the main place.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure that's linked in the description. And Drew, thanks for coming on. I can't believe it's been this long before
almost 3
having
years
you on the podcast. I think we planned to record a long time ago, but for various reasons, like not being able to come out due to COVID, the pandemic, and I'm glad that we got to sit down and do it in person, because I think it's a much more meaningful conversation that way, and hopefully people will stop saying that we're the same person now. But you never know. Maybe we're just encouraging people. That's pretty good timing, isn't it? That the camera seems to have just died. But that's fine, because they don't need to see your face anymore, because I'm about to do my outro.
I'll just say I appreciate the challenge. This was being challenged by my contemporary in this, my main peer in this niche is fantastic. I think we should be challenging each other.
Yeah, no, that's what we like to do here at the Cosmic Skeptic podcast and Patreon account, which you can support via the link in the description. Seriously, everything that I do, as I like to remind you at the end of these videos, is supported by you on patreon.com/Cosmic Skeptic. So if you like this kind of content, please do consider becoming a supporter and allowing me to keep traveling around the world and talking to wonderful people. And a special thanks, as always, of course, I nearly forgot, to my top tier patrons, who really do help to keep the channel afloat. With that said, I have, as always, been Alex O'Connor. Today, I've been in conversation with Drew McCoy, and you've been watching the Cosmic Skeptic podcast.
Boom. Another one wrapped up in the books, boys. Let's go. All right. So that brings us to 198 videos watched. And then through these live streams, we have watched 48 videos. That's awesome. I think I have autoplay on, so I'm going to do that. All right. now it's time to leave a comment. What stuck out to you guys? What was kind of some of the things that you found kind of most interesting from that video? Let me know, and I'll include it in the comment there. So let me scroll on down. I think I think the whole notion of how they've changed their perspective from being like anti-theists to being a little bit more on the agnostic side is pretty interesting. I mean, that's something they talk about a lot, kind of, at least Alex talks about a lot more these days. So it's cool to kind of see they're starting to be a little bit more public about that. I think it's important to be that way if you are kind of atheist or agnostic. I understand if you're not that way, if you're like a different group or different perspective. But yeah, I think it is important, especially if you are atheist or agnostic, to be more generous and more understanding of different perspectives. So it's good to see. The other thing, I'm trying to remember. Actually, let me look at what we chatted about here. Yeah, I guess a lot of it was about the arguments that they find a little bit more convincing and being less antagonistic in general, which is pretty cool. So I think that's what I'll share about. But if you guys had any specific points that you're like, yo, include this in the comment, let me know, and I will do that. So just give me a sec, and then we can continue. Okay, maybe pushing my luck here, but is there any particular reason that you would come back to Christianity? So I would probably never come back to Christianity in the exclusivist sense, but I probably would be willing to accept Christianity in a more holistic sense, meaning it's true, but other faiths are also accurate in understanding what is true. So that's kind of the main reason, because the reason I deconstructed is because I was personally transformed. Like, my life changed for the better from being a Christian. I had a testimony where I was very depressed, and I was addicted to like pornography, and I didn't really feel like I had any direction in life. And God, met me where I was at and totally changed my life. But I went to India and I met a lot of Hindus while I was in India, and they also had very transformative experiences. I met one lady who every day she had suicidal thoughts, and it wasn't until she went to a river in the city we were in and prayed to the local river goddess there. And as soon as she did, her suicidal thoughts went away. And every single day she would do that until they went away for good. And her life just totally changed from there. And so to me, I think there's a sense of truth to a lot of religious faiths. I don't think any of them get it exclusively correct. So if I ever came back to Christianity, it would probably be in a more kind of Eastern sense, where there's a lot more connection and less exclusivity to other religions or expressions of faith. All the other faces contradict each other, so they are not able to be true. Jesus claimed to be the only way, and as far as I can tell, he's the only one who has proven it. I haven't studied. So when he says that he's the only way, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus also says that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, and that his disciples can become one with him as he is one with the Father. That's also something that Jesus says, which to me actually has a lot of similarity to Eastern cultures. Now, obviously, you're not going to interpret that verse as what I'm saying, but what I think Jesus is potentially saying here is this sense of we are all a part of the process of becoming more and more divine, and we can become divine as Jesus is divine and as the Father is divine. Not like perfectly sinless, but like in the sense that we recognize our unity to one another, that we are one together in a spiritual sense. And so when Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, you could interpret that as he is the representative of becoming one with consciousness and with other, basically becoming one with the Father, who would be the unified consciousness of reality, right? And a lot of Gnostics actually believed that, right? Gnostic Christianity. Obviously, when I say the word Gnostic, there's so many different expressions of Gnosticism. It's more of a modern term, but ancient Christians, there was a lot of ancient Christians, specifically in the East, that expressed that idea that no longer is really expressed in modern Christianity. So if I were to become a Christian, that's kind of what I mean. It'd be less to do with the salvation would be found in emulating Jesus, but not necessarily found in Jesus like crucifixion and resurrection alone. That would be his sort of expression of power over death, but salvation is found through gnosis, which is practicing the works and the lifestyle of Jesus and recognizing everyone as one in consciousness. But here's the thing. You say, I try not to interpret it. I try to read it for what it is. Here's the thing. Everyone interprets it. Every time you read it, you are reading an interpretation onto the text, because your interpretation, and this was me too, is influenced by Western culture. It's influenced by the modern church. Like, there is no sense of like, I'm reading it as objectively as it's supposed to be, versus they're, reading it wrong. The reality is these texts were read and interpreted in many different ways. And that's actually why something like the Nicene Creed was created. under Constantine, because he was realizing there was so much diversity in Christianity. There was nothing really unifying its doctrine. And so he got people together, and that's when things were started to be deemed as heretical, and some things were deemed as orthodox. And so no matter what, your interpretive lens is going to be an interpretation of the text. Like we don't know who the original authors of the Gospels were. We don't know who the original authors of most of the New Testament was. Even Paul, like he wrote 13 books, but scholars, like historians, really can only say solidly that he wrote 7, and the other ones, we're not really sure who wrote those, right? So there's a lot of like uncertainty about what the interpretation is. The only way that we interpret it is by looking at how the original people interpreted it. And when we look at how the original people interpreted it, it's a lot more diverse, right, than is expressed in modern Christianity, which was developed through Orthodox creeds and councils like the Council of Nicaea. The book of 1 John goes over people who preach false gospel. They left us because they were not of us. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be, like I said, there's a lot of different groups and people so a lot of the New Testament is not going to agree with one another, right? Like the book of Jude, it quotes from the book of Enoch, which is not considered a part of the canonical canon of the Bible today. And yet it was considered as authoritative scripture by early Christians, because we know that the writer of whoever wrote Jude is quoting Enoch. And so clearly there's diversity even within the New Testament. And so like that's kind of what I mean is there's several different groups. They're all not going to agree with each other, and they all interpret the Bible vastly differently. So yeah, that's what I mean. There are a lot of different groups, but do you think Jesus intended for there to be multiple waves, or is there only one way given what he said? So the reality is we have no idea what Jesus said, right? We have these texts that interpret Jesus and tell us like what he did and said, but they're all like written decades after Jesus by groups that would have never met Jesus. But we're probably influenced by early Christians, right? So the reality is I think we can maybe construct a understanding of who Jesus was generally, but in terms of like how people interpreted him and disagreed, I don't think we can have a clear answer, at least historically, on those things. You're saying more so you would join the Christ conscious coalition more than traditional Christianity, which I'm not sure there's a book, chapter, verse to back up a spiritual only argument. It depends. Do you mean in the Bible, or do you mean other like Nag Hammadi texts from early Christianity? Because there's some historians who argue that even the Gospel of John is a Gnostic text, and has a little bit more of that sort of oneness theology. I wouldn't quite go there all the way. It's a little bit more interpretive in John, but there are historians that make a case for that. And then there's early texts like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Judas, two of our earliest Gnostic texts, which date closely to the dating of the Gospel of John itself. Those texts are also very influential on Christianity. The Gospels were written as soon as 50 years after Jesus' resurrection, which is extremely close from historical standpoint. Alexander the Great was first recorded 450 years after he lived, and yet we don't dispute anything about him. So we do actually dispute a lot of the things that's said about Alexander the Great, but the things we don't dispute is the contemporary evidence of Alexander the Great. So like things like coins, things like physical representations of Alexander the Great, which we do have that do date to his time, right? So yes, literarily, we don't have a lot that date directly to Alexander the Great, but we do have things that date to his time and life, as well as people like Aristotle, who would have known Alexander the Great, and he's someone that writes a little bit about Alexander the Great as well. So to say like just because literarily there's a difference, doesn't mean that there isn't as much historical grounding, because there is like archaeological contemporary evidence that we have for them that we don't have for Jesus. And then literary, like I do think there is a problem in 50 years. You're right. There isn't as much time for like the myth to grow in 50 years, but there is enough time for inaccuracies to occur. I do think we can come to an understanding of Jesus, though, from the Gospels, like a pretty good understanding, but it is going to be interpretative. And a lot of his theology is interpreted through different denominations and schools of thought. So that's why, in terms of theology, I don't think we can make clear claims about what Jesus believed. In terms of general characteristics, reoccurring themes, I think we can, but in terms of like specific theological points, I don't know. I really don't think we can make a clear stance one way or the other. I think there's a lot of valid ways to interpret it. They are within the living memory of the actual events, not hundreds of years later. There's a time delay of at least 60 seconds on here, so bear with me. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, and that's what I would agree. Like I do think there's not nearly as much time for like mythology to adapt and things of that sort. But clearly the early church did not agree on a lot of things, and the fact that they agreed, in the Council of Nicaea, which I believe. I might have to look that up, but it's definitely centuries after Jesus. That's when orthodoxy was established, and that's, to me, that's what's really guiding a lot of our modern day interpretation, which is problematic in my books. That and Augustine. Augustine is 3rd century, so potentially you could say that his works are a little bit more. But Augustine himself, he was a Manichaean growing up, and believed that Manichaeism was still part of Christianity, which modern Christians would reject. If I were to go and want to read about the Civil War, I would not go to someone's interpretation of it from the 1950s. I would go to the eyewitness journal entries from soldiers. Is this not the same? Yes. No, that is the same. But what we're looking at is not like going back to the 1860s and reading firsthand primary sources, but what we're looking at is more kind of that like 1910s era at the earliest, and in their interpretation of the Civil War, and saying that that's what truly happened. Do you see what I mean? It'd be like going back and writing about something that happened 50 years ago and like interpreting it in that way versus someone who was actually there, right? Pretty much every historian does not believe that, the traditional authors of the Gospels were the traditional authors. Like Mark, most people don't think Mark wrote Mark. Most people don't think that Matthew wrote Matthew or Luke or John, because a lot, like especially John, a lot of John would not be alive by the time that John was written. So, but they probably came from areas that were influenced by those apostles. So they would carry the oral tradition of those apostles potentially. So you've been super respectful tonight. I know we're a bit different on how we believe, but it's been a great conversation. The Dead Sea Scrolls give a lot of argument for what you're saying because it hasn't changed since those scrolls were found. Mark is really the Gospel of Peter. It was just recorded by John Mark. Yeah. In church tradition. So I would agree with that point. So yeah. No, I love this. I really do appreciate you bring up these points, because I've brought up those points myself, like when I was a Christian, and so I've changed my mind since. But I do think some of it, I mean, it's not ridiculous. I think they are good reasons. If you already believe in Christianity, I think they're good, like, kind of reasons to further improve your thinking for it. But if you're outside Christianity, I just don't think historically it's quite as founded as most people would like it to be. So that's kind of just my thought on it. But yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on all of that stuff. It's really cool. Okay. I think I'm going to leave this comment if we're cool with that. Oh, there we go. Comment left. I got to get up early tomorrow, so I'm going to call it quits for tonight. But y'all appreciate the topics tonight. It's been super cool to dive into this conversation with you folks, and to hear what you guys have to think. So, yeah, this is Jackson of Truth and Tradition. If you're unfamiliar with it, I'm doing a series watching every single Alex O'Connor video on the internet in order to potentially become invited as a guest onto his podcast. So that's kind of the reason I'm doing this. If you want to join these live streams, if you enjoyed it, I do it every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. And then I release podcasts once a month. So, yeah, you can enjoy that on my channel. So feel free to give it a like, subscribe. I also do buy me a coffee. So if you'd like to send me some money too, you can click that link down below, buy me a coffee /truth_tradition. So appreciate you guys. I hope that you guys have a wonderful rest of your night. And